All right. Okay, I'd like to call the March 20th, 2018 City Council meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Tom Hornish.
Present.
Councilmember Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
Wow. Smooth.
Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Present.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Here.
The Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Ross, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Amendments. I would like to remove item number 7.
Well, we'll get to the consent, though.
Well, let's remove it now so we know. I think that's what we typically did. I think we changed it last week, but it really should be.
Well, usually we vote on the consent, so.
I think actually Mr. Ornish is
Okay,
correct.
okay, so are there any other amendments? I move that we pull item number 2. So we got 2, 7, and I'd also like to pull item number 5. So we have 2, 5, and 7. We'll put those under new business. Anything else? All those in favor of the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By a vote of 7-0, our agenda is approved. Now we will have public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the council, 3-minute limit per person or 5 minutes if representing the official position of a recognized community organization. If you would like to show a video or PowerPoint, it must be submitted or emailed by 5 p.m. the end of business day to the city clerk, Melanie Anderson at manderson@sammamish.us. Please be aware council meetings are videotaped and available to the public. First, I have Roisin O'Farrell.
Alicia, do I just use the... This is going to be interesting. Good evening, City Council. My name is Roisin O'Farrell, 24114 Southeast 22nd Street. I'd like to thank City Manager and the councils for proclaiming April 2nd World Autism Awareness Day in the City of Sammamish. This is our 3rd year doing this. As part of Autism Awareness Day, the Light It Up Blue campaign, which is the brainchild of Autism Speaks, asks cities around the world to light up their famous landmarks and civic buildings blue to bring attention to autism. And this is a picture of the city of Sammamish last year, lit up blue, along with, see if I can do this clicker thing. It's not really working. Okay, along with Lisa, are you able to help me out there? So we had the White House, there's the Tower of London, the pyramids, the Empire State Building, Sydney Opera House, etc. Oh, it's my son. He's next.
Blue
but
light?
He's a little early. Okay. So what is autism? Autism is a developmental condition characterized by challenges with social interaction, communication, and repetitive behavior. Autism, according to the CDC, affects 1 in 68 children in the United States. But I have really come tonight to talk to you about things closer to home. International campaigns are very nice, but this is personal. If I can get my clicker to work again. Okay.
Actually, can you go next page for her too?
It's not really working. Can you do that for me, Lita? My time is running out.
There you go.
This is my son, Kian. He was diagnosed with autism at 8 years old at the University of Washington Autism Center. He's grown into a wonderful man of 17, and he is an 11th grader in Skyline High School. As a teenager with autism, the single greatest challenge is having a fulfilling social life. One of the greatest things so far to come out of Kian's time in Skyline High School was the formation of LEAP Club. This club was established 3 years ago by an 11th grader who wanted to be more involved with the students in the LRC 2 program. The LEAP Club organises social events both in and outside of school with the students of the LRC 2. LRC is the Learning Resource Centre for students with special needs. So as part of the programme of events, LEAP have organised their annual basketball game. One of the reasons for doing this with special needs students is the special needs students rarely get an opportunity to play for their school. They rarely get a chance to put on the school colours and represent their classmates and have the band playing and the cheerleaders cheering for them. Last year we played Issaquah High School, which we beat, in Skyline, and this year we are taking on Eastlake High School in the Spartan Gym this Saturday, the 24th at 6:30. All are welcome. It's a very, very fun night. So what's this all for? Well, if we as a community can support our children and adults with special needs, with social opportunities, education and employment opportunities, we as a city are helping ourselves too. I want to thank you so much for listening to me tonight and thinking about our autism community here in Sammamish. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Charlie Connor.
I won't need the clicker. Thank you, Council. I was inspired to be here tonight reviewing the agenda for the meeting and seeing that Mayor Malchow is going to give a council report on Regional Affordable Housing Task Force. So I had some thoughts about that. I'm a second-generation home builder, community builder, one of the few non-national builders left in the region. I raised my children here in this community, but they can't afford to live here without subsidy. I'd like to make a distinction between affordable housing, which is usually subsidized housing, and which is looking for someone else to pay, versus value or cost-effective housing. Cost should provide value to the home buyer or the community versus attorneys, consultants, and financiers. If there's a commitment to value as opposed to subsidized housing, I offer these suggestions as these are the areas you can have the most control of. Number one, set policies consistent with goals, zoning, comprehensive plan, then hold staff accountable to getting the work done. Brace for impact. Some won't be happy with your decisions and seek to undermine, delay, or reverse implementation. 2, support achieving comprehensive plan housing density goals. 3, process efficiently and effectively during and after preliminary approval. 4, act with clarity, integrity, and consistency at every level. Make reasoned decisions and be able to answer how and why those decisions were made. 5, promote an attitude of facilitation. Here's how we can get this done, rather than this is why we can't. 6, once a land use has been determined, facilitate uninterrupted, efficient processes and construction. 7, recognize delay increases cost immensely for all and discourages supply. And ask yourself, who benefits? 8, support due process, individual property rights, rule of law, and the staff who's tasked with doing the work. Discretion should facilitate progress rather than be an excuse for denial. Every day of delay increases cost and scarcity. Scarcity is vivid to me, having seen 200 people show up at a recent open house, many competing for an opportunity to purchase a handful of homes. You have the opportunity and obligation to explain to constituents how you and staff are meeting the law. Leadership is doing the right thing versus what is popular. Supply and demand determine price. Cost limits competition, concentrates supply in the largest national and multinational best finance hands.
Mr. Connor, we've failed to start the time, but that is 3 minutes. Can you wrap up, please?
Planning should perform the most important function. The lack thereof is at the root of most community discontent. That's infrastructure. The alternative is to increase costs, increase what others must subsidize. When do we run out of other people's money?
Thank you.
Mr.
We need
Connor,
you to
we
wrap
need you to
up.
wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Jay Kraus.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager. I'm here tonight on Jay Kraus, General Manager of the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District. I'm here tonight representing the district, and I've been requested to offer comments on behalf of the district's Board of Commissioners. The district's board became aware back in December of proposed amendments to the Sammamish Municipal Code related to stormwater regulation. After becoming aware of that, we had some exchange with district staff, city staff, and offered some amendments to the code. They were rather brief in nature, very brief in text. Unfortunately, they don't appear to have made their way to the City Council, and it appears a SEPA interpretation has precluded that. In spite of that, the district's board has asked that I come tonight and ask the City Council to recognize the district's concerns and continue to work with the district on code amendments that would protect our drinking water supply, specifically groundwater. There are indeed some gray areas and perhaps contradictions in the city code that have to balance stormwater infiltration, low impact development, and groundwater protection. And the district would ask that the City Council continue to make this a priority for sustainability in the community. You may hear later in the meeting, because we don't get a chance to comment when district staff or city staff presents, that the city offered a memorandum of understanding to the district to try and set some review parameters. We did work with the city staff on that. The district's Board of Commissioners, though, asked that we not enter into that because an MOU is not legally binding. It's not enforceable. It's not a contract. And there's no better substitute than well-written codes for administration and development review. So the district would ask the city to continue working with it for code revisions. I'll also offer a comment on one other thing. You know, we do tend to work together. We do tend to have good cooperation, and the Southeast Fourth project, which is on the agenda for approval tonight, is a good example. We're cooperatively doing that under an interlocal agreement. In fact, the district is acquiescing to a bid that is less than favorable to the district to allow that project to go forward and minimize impacts to the community. With that said, though, we would ask that the city consider road closure during that project as a means of saving dollars to all of our constituents. It's not a high traffic volume area, and sometimes a short-term inconvenience to get a project done is more advantageous than having ongoing construction for an extended period. So we would ask that the city consider that and at least balance it and then make a decision on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay, I've got a question. You obviously had started working with the city on a memorandum of understanding until I understand that it's not contractually binding. I'm just curious why you then started to work on it and then decided not to do one.
Well, first of all, it was underlying for code administration. And if the code doesn't allow for certain things, it's really questionable whether we could enter into some of these processes without ordinances that allow for actionable items to be offered. And candidly, then the Board of Commissioners was concerned that it just wasn't binding, and ordinances are enforceable at the end of the day.
Okay.
I have a quick question for the city manager, just based on his comment on closure potentially for Southeast Fourth. I don't recall that being something that we had discussed.
That is something we have not yet discussed. It is something that we could look at, and we would let council know what the implications of that would
Great.
be for
Appreciate
impact.
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next, I have Barbara Raub.
I'm Barbara Robbie. I live at 21421 Northeast 6th Place, Sammamish. I'm speaking about stormwater code amendments. I've lived in this house on George Dravis Creek for 40 years, this coming June. I have firsthand knowledge of what can happen when new building is permitted without mitigation for additional stormwater runoff and erosion control as a result of removing vegetation and clearing and grading on or above steep slopes and in erosion hazard areas. My neighbors across the stream and beneath the steep slope spent tens of thousands of their own money to shore up the hill behind them when development began atop that hill. When development after development in the Inkwood Hill area sent their drainage into George Davis Creek, there was severe erosion of the steep slopes along the creek, and it finally blew out East Lake Sammamish Parkway and sent all this sediment into Lake Sammamish. The county spent millions helicoptering old-growth stumps from Mount Rainier into the creek to slow the flow of the creek. Those of us that live along George Davis Creek have a 150-foot buffer on our property because, though there are no fish present, we respect the fragility of the creek. I attended nearly all of the commission meetings regarding the revision of the hazardous areas overlay that led to the adoption of the new stormwater and hazardous areas codes that became part of the updated comprehensive plan. The city, in the end, adopted a much more relaxed code than recommended by the consulting firm that the city had hired. From what I gathered, it seemed that the former variances were now called pilot programs and allowed development that did not meet code. I'm thrilled to hear that the pilot programs are being eliminated, but I urge you to take a lesson from history and then retain the current rules in regard to stormwater mitigation and building in hazardous area zones. Thank you.
Thank you. James Eastman.
I have a presentation. James Eastman, multiple properties along 196th Avenue Northeast. Okay, so I feel this code really does, I mean, stormwater is definitely a problem in the city of Sammamish, but I don't think this code really does much to identify and address the whole problem. It seems to attack people that are in the landslide hazard area or people that drain to it. I own multiple acres, and you got all a timberline who drains all of their streets and their houses and point discharges from 500 feet right into our property, and it's highly erosive and it wreaks havoc. The lady before talked about George Davis Creek, which we all know is one of the biggest problems in the entire city. It's not working, but as far as erosion and stormwater goes, well, the headwaters of George Davis Creek expand all the way to Allen Lake. That's probably one of the most famous landslides in our city history. That's George Davis Creek. How come this landslide hazard drainage area doesn't cover anything that drains to George Davis Creek? I mean, George Davis Creek is overflowing in these large rain events. That's water that hits the creek anywhere up along its path. And the city of Sammamish Town Center, that's 500-foot elevation. I might be dumping in at 75-foot elevation, but yet I'm held to a much stricter code, but yet my water's not flowing nearly as far to get to the lake, is wreaking way less havoc than allowing it in at the town center or Allen Lake and crashing down the hillside a couple miles to get to Lake Sammamish. I might own 10 acres, but I only can put 500 square feet of impervious surface. I mean, I can fit probably 100 or 200 Inglewood lots in my 10 acres, but there's nothing in the code that says, look, you own 10 acres, you offset all that with trees and everything else, there's no benefit. So, next slide. This code is highly restrictive. It doesn't really do anything to fix the problem. Next slide again. It attacks vaults. I don't see what the problem is with vaults. That's a vault on the right that went in 20 years ago. It's a park underneath, a basketball court. People can use it. Pond on the left, I mean, you don't see people boating out there fishing. I mean, that's unusable. It's ugly. They're all over. Next slide. Why aren't we doing this on a small scale? I mean, what is the square footage trade-off? If you add 1,000 square feet of impervious, how many gallons do you need to retain? This is old technology. I mean, septic systems have been around 100 years. We have 6,000 in Sammamish. It's $1 a gallon to store water. You could put that under a driveway. You could put it under a lawn. Why aren't we storing 5,000 gallons in somebody's front yard under a foot of topsoil and have a restrictor on there? The technology's there, but our latest code tonight doesn't encourage it at all, and I don't think that's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Frank Santoni.
I'm Frank Santoni at 22828 Southeast 6th Place. Under unfinished business tonight, the council will be discussing changes to the Sammamish Municipal Code dealing with stormwater runoff. And we are very much in favor of adopting the changes recommended by city staff. Specifically, my comments relate to the staff's proposed changes to the Sammamish Municipal Code section 1320.40, which will provide for exemptions and exceptions to the core requirements for stormwater runoff. This would in fact allow for well-engineered, low-impact designs to be used on small projects. The changes now have been brought to before the council for the 7th time since last November, and there are numerous projects like ours just waiting for these plans to be approved and these codes to be approved so they can get their plans off the ground. The proposed changes provide the flexibility to allow for well-engineered stormwater runoff designs to be constructed on small projects which would otherwise require large ponds or vaults and higher impacts on the environment. Let me give you an example. We have plans to rebuild our house on less than a half-acre lot near Pine Lake with Roger McPherson Construction, who has built many houses on the lake and actually lives on the lake too. If the proposed changes are not approved, we'd be looking at something like a 42 by 42 foot pond, which is close to the footprint of the entire house, or a vault measuring 4 feet by 6 feet by 130 foot long, similar to those vaults used in larger developments. They are just actually impractical for the land use that we want to use on our property, and they are just cost prohibitive. It would also cause for the removal of many otherwise healthy trees and have a higher impact on the environment than an alternative system could provide. If the proposed changes are approved, our engineer can work with the city to design a system resulting with more acceptable stormwater runoff capability and with virtually no impact to the trees on the property. So we urge the council to approve the changes that the staff has so diligently developed that both protect the environment and allow for acceptable designs of single-family homes and smaller projects. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I have Karen Herring.
Karen Herring, 23684 Southeast 32nd. I'm here to speak for our little red fish, who would like us to swim right tonight. When stormwater runoff creates surface water that pools and erodes in my yard, this water drains into the Laughing Jacobs Creek. Please remember, this is the one creek that had kokanee spotted in late 2017. These salmon are native to Sammamish and are known to spawn in Lewis, Zacchaeus, Laughing Jacobs, Ebright, Pine Lake, and sometimes George Davis, and some shoreline areas in Lake Sammamish. We must make every effort to not be the reason for the current drastic reduction or eradication of these native residents. We must manage our stormwater, runoff, increased flow, contaminants, and surface water. When minimum standards are the accepted standards, we do not protect our environment. Drainage review must be required, and those requirements should be increased. Unmanaged stormwater of any type gives problem to aquifers, overburdened storm systems, properties, and our infrastructure, and don't get me started on our yards. Our lakes are listed as impaired according to ecology, so something must be done to filter our stormwater. Sammamish has a colossal amount Sammamish has a colossal amount of environmentally critical, steep slope, hazard, chara, susceptible to groundwater contamination, and areas that are eroding for reasons unchecked. For those who may be interested in losses relating to financial impact, please consider that Washington relies on salmon for food, recreation, jobs, cultural identity, and social tradition. These iconic fish evoke the best Washington has to offer: pristine water, rich landscape, a healthy environment, and a thriving natural resource economy, like we used to have here. Sammamish has an opportunity to require our stormwater code not only protect people, property, and infrastructure, but protect our environment. For without a clean environment, we won't have our little red fish anymore. Please require our code protects everyone and everything and eliminates harm. So swim right tonight, and thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Stephanie Carlson.
Good evening. Stephanie Carlson, 1603 223rd Avenue Southeast. I hope you all received my email. I'm going to try to speed through here, but if I don't get to everything, you have it there. I'm here tonight because I want to talk about this map. This is, you may recall this is a slide from part of the PowerPoint presentation made by the Fair and Pierce traffic consultants at the regular council meeting in January 2018. This slide in particular illustrates one of the transportation investment scenarios that the council is going to be deciding upon. This is locally connected community. The council will be deciding in the near future, if I understand correctly, on a transportation investment scenario as part of the larger transportation master plan. And I wanted to bring this road connection to your attention. I'm here again on behalf of all my neighbors to argue against a road connection and to ask the council as it moves forward not to allow, not to approve the creation of a road connection between 223rd Avenue Southeast and Lancaster Way. If I could have the next slide. Shall I try this? Oh, great, thank you. You know, some might say these are typical considerations. This is just a sketch. But I know that this map was created in consultation with city staff, and I think what it really shows is the creation of a new arterial. We know that the city is looking for ways to move traffic east-west on the plateau and in and around town center. I don't take this sketch lightly, even if it just sort of, oops, showed up. You know, the idea here, you take Southeast 20th up to 23rd, through to Lancaster Way, down Southeast 8th, maybe up to the town center, cross over to 12th and out to the Parkway. If I could have the next slide, that's it. So I want to focus specifically on the road connection between 223rd and Lancaster Way, which is the sort of vertical piece there on the red line. And this road connection has been floating around for a while. It's not a surprise. My family and I moved here in 2013, and in 2013, the Pulte Group was trying to put 40 homes in between our two streets. The city was requiring a road connection. No surprise, Pulte went away. Then in 2016, Tureen Homes showed up and proposed Big Rock Vista, a subdivision of 22 homes. Interestingly, the city was not requiring a road connection this time, or even road improvements, just the creation of right-of-ways between Lancaster Way and 223rd. Could I have the next slide, please? So that's Pulte. That went away. The next slide, please. This was Mr. Howard's email to Pulte explaining why they needed a road connection. I'll take the next slide, please. This is Big Rock Vista. Next slide. That's also part of Big Rock Vista. Next slide. This is so this was part of the preliminary plat approval. The condition for the approval was the creation of these right-of-ways. And the language in this all, oh, darn.
You can finish your sentence.
Okay. Well, the language makes clear that the through road connection is the ultimate goal here. And so I would ask you just to take a look at the PowerPoint and my notes, and I'd love to talk further. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have Mary Wichter.
Hello, my name's Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. And the stormwater code changes need to be changed before anything's adopted for the Inglewood neighborhood and landslide hazard drainage areas and critical drainage areas citywide. If we look back when drainage review was required in 1998, the threshold was 5,000 square feet of new, and for landslides, it was 2,000 square feet. So drainage review was required when things were larger or more complex. And then over the next few years, everything got switched to 2,000 square feet, which is not a changeable threshold, but there was nothing offered less for landslide hazard areas. Before I started speaking 3 years ago, city had a bunch of bad problems with, so they had emergency surface water ordinances, and they dropped the drainage review to 500 square feet and the tight line check for 500 square feet because of impacts in landslide hazard areas. Tamarack was added to that ordinance in 2016, and the adoptions are for landslide hazard areas and a 500 square foot tight line check. Landslide hazard problems do have safety concerns, and you do need to have a tight line. Please, next slide. The code is supposedly inconsistent, and where I see the inconsistencies are is Inglewood should have 500 square feet. It could just be for new impervious surfaces, but if you're not going to do new replaced or new plus replaced, you need to ask about existing impervious surfaces and maximum ones. Landslide hazard drainage areas and critical drainage areas do need to have a drainage review. And there were some input given on Beaver and Pine Lakes, but since those were critical drainage areas in 2013, and there was a lot of hearings and readings to do those adoptions, and also in 2016, I don't think that changes to those should be made right now. So my suggested changes are to keep the drainage review for Inglewood at 500 square feet, which staff agrees with, but also apply it to any lot which is non-conforming to zoning. Inglewood has lots 4 times as small as the zoning, so the threshold of 500 is 4 times the size of the 2,000 square foot threshold. You should also check for unchanged impervious surface plus existing at 2,500 square feet, or if existing pervious surface coverage is 35%, and that comes from King County for significantly developed lots. And then you can leave the part about if it's located in a critical drainage area or landslide hazard drainage area, which is included in that, so drainage review will occur. Next slide, please. Now, regarding percent versus square feet, both the Planning Commission and Council noted that they would rather see percents because it works much better for small lots, and James Eastman has pointed out large lots still need some help. The Department of Commerce and GMA say that for clearing and grading, you can't give exemptions under 50 cubic yards. 50 cubic yards is somebody coming with a backhoe and 3 to 5 dump trucks. You should have to have a drainage review. So for 7,000 square feet, you also need to say 35% of the site for clearing or 25% of the site for grading. That helps you with smaller lots. Regarding exceptions and exemptions from core, you should not give them based solely on size and none from 2 or 9. But since 9 is lid feasibility and BMPs, you need to have a list of things like we shouldn't put water in major utility corridors, even if a geotech says it's okay. Flow control facilities and water quality, you could pick a number between 0 and 5,000 square feet. There's no magic number. You need to use project site factors, and you can see my list. Keep the tight line threshold at 500 square feet. There are problem areas that exist. A 500 square foot threshold does not restrict the lives of a house, and reasonable use exceptions are for modest. So I have emailed you things today that hopefully you've seen. I will finish by saying Mercer Island has been using a 500 square foot net threshold since the mid-1990s. If they can use that citywide, why can't Sammamish use it for our most critical areas for drainage review? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Eileen?
Good evening. I'm Eileen Stahl, 21553 Southeast 28th Lane in Sammamish. I'm representing Friends of Pine Lake tonight. I'm not sure if you recognize us as a group, but we've been around for 20 years, so I hope so. I don't think I'll take the 5 minutes, but please give me some time here. Friends of Pine Lake has volunteered on behalf of our environment for the past 20 years. Though virtually every public process we have advocated to protect and preserve what we have. At the same time, developers and city staff push for less regulation, more flexibility, and a more balanced approach to our development code. And so, in the name of what seems to be a reasonable approach, we have done so. And so our efforts have been especially good for the development community. They are making lots of money here. But on the other side of that balance, how is our environment doing? It is not doing well. The Lake Sammamish kokanee are becoming extinct on our watch. They have evolved and lived here in our streams since the last ice age, thousands of years. These fish are like a canary in our coal mine. They have simple needs: clean, oxygenated water and stream habitat to spawn. This should be easy enough to provide, and it used to be that the land was able to buffer the impacts from human activity. But we have created a perfect storm. We're taking down trees and creating more impervious surfaces. At the same time, we have glacial till soils that don't infiltrate well, and on top of everything, quite literally, we are on a plateau. Excess stormwater then pools, floods, and negatively affects our neighbors and the land. It scours our streams of habitat and erodes the soils into Lake Sammamish, causing oxygen to become depleted. We are suffocating these fish. All the balance and flexibility we have built into our code are being used by developers whose profits are their main criteria, and it's costing the public our very quality of life and balancing our environment into oblivion. We have now reached a point where we have very little time. We need to strengthen our regulations instead of loosening them. Every developer must take responsibility for any stormwater they create on site. We ask the council not to increase the amount of impervious surface that is exempted from our stormwater regulations. And I also want to say that when we first became a city, we were going to get all of our basin plans done. Well, now, 20 years later, we have 2 or maybe 3, maybe we're implementing the Zaccoose Creek one now, but we're still acting in the dark. We still don't know what the cumulative effects of what we're doing are. And I encourage the council to take a closer look at those cumulative impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council this evening? Mary, please.
I understand that our manager, Jay Krause, already presented, so I want to add a ditto. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Nope, seeing none. I want to take just a second to squelch a rumor that came to my attention today for the benefit of the full council as well as the public. I just want to make it clear, I have no intentions of running for any office this year or the next year. I am very comfortable in my seat on the city council, and I want to be sure that the public is aware of my commitment to the city of Sammamish, and I want my fellow council members to understand that I do not have any intentions of running for our office. So thank you for letting me make that publicly known. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a public hearing.
I missed it on the agenda.
This is the authorizing use of condemnation pursuant to Chapter 8.12 RCW. This is for the Issaquah Falls City Road project between 242nd Avenue Southeast and Klahani Drive Southeast. Mr. City Manager.
Mayor,
Yes.
I think we need to vote on the consent calendar.
Oh, I thought, okay, that's right. That's right. Thank you. All right, so back to the consent where it has now been amended. So we have moved items 2, 5, and 7.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, by a motion of 7-0, we have approved the consent calendar. Now we will move to that public hearing on condemnation for the Issaquah Falls City Road project. Mr. City Manager.
Very good. Thank you very much. We have tonight Andrew Zagers, our city engineer, who just give us a brief overview on what is happening on this particular project for the Issaquah Falls City Road.
Good evening, Mayor and fellow council members. We're here to open a public hearing for the, and then a hopeful adoption of an ordinance to allow the city to enter into condemnation process if all other resorts or other issues for acquiring property, come to a failure. Obviously, that's not our intent. We still follow the same process that we've done on all our other projects with negotiating, but this ordinance is more procedural than actually a requirement at this time. What it is it allows us to continue our negotiations and appraisals of the right-of-way needed for the Issaquah Falls City project. And without that pressure, we can continue on negotiation, do appraisals, approach the owners, go through negotiation process, and while we continue our design. And then if that doesn't work, we obviously do the same thing with the Southeast Fourth, go towards a possession and use process, continue our negotiations, but in the meantime, we can, if everything fails, we can then come back to council and deal with the process for the condemnation. But for that to happen, we have to have an ordinance in place.
Okay, very good. I will open the public hearing. We have, nope. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this public hearing? Is it empty? Is there some? Okay. Okay. Then I will close the public hearing. All right, we will be moving on to item number.
Well,
We need to authorize it, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Sorry,
Any
it's-
questions?
there we go. No, yeah, at least that one's working. Deputy Mayor Hornish.
I would like to skip questions and move to approve the ordinance authorizing use of condemnation pursuant to Chapter 8.12 RCW as required for the Issaquah Falls City Road project between 242nd and Klahani, and authorizing payment therefore from the Transportation Capital Improvement Fund and otherwise from the general fund as may be necessary, providing for severability, and establishing an effective date.
I need a second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Councilmember Valderrama?
Yeah, I'm always nervous when we talk about condemnation process, and I know you had mentioned that it makes it easier, but it would make it easier from our side. It would add pressure to the other parties, obviously, having this approved. And how many parcels are we still in discussion with that have not reconciled with the city on this project, just for my edification?
We've actually just started the right-of-way process. That's why we're doing the ordinance first, similar to what we did with Southeast Fourth. There's a total of 18 lots where we need strips of right-of-way or portions of right-of-way. Of those, there's 12 owners. It includes churches, the school, various two homeowner associations, and then private property owners that we're working with right now. To be on the positive side, everyone has been very positive to work with, and they're very proactive with the project. So I don't see this as something that'll be an end result. I really do feel we'll be coming to negotiations and coming to agreement before we even have to do something like
And
this.
I will point out also that condemnation is our very, very last resort.
I understand, but it seems premature to be coming out this early. From my perspective, especially if we're having everything going smoothly, it takes me a little bit by surprise, and that, given what I'm hearing. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, for clarification, you said the ordinance had to be in place to go through the process of negotiating or discussing with homeowners, or the condemnation process itself?
That is correct.
The latter.
For us to even discuss and going through condemnation and possession and use, we have to have the ordinance in place.
So even the discussions, not even leading to condemnation?
For discussions, for negotiations, we do not. But if we start going in towards a possession and use type of situation where we're still negotiating, but we acquire the right to use the property for our project, then we need to have that condemnation ordinance in place.
Okay, so very good, thank you.
Okay, I don't have any more discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 5-2, the motion passes. Okay. We have another public hearing. This is on the 2018 docketed comprehensive plan amendment for the Parks element to incorporate the updated 2018 Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan.
Okay, thank you. I'll just turn things over to staff at this particular moment, and will lead us through where we are in the process with ProPlan and why we need to do essentially a public hearing, as well as for effectively, this will be the first reading, but I'll let staff go through the process.
Thank you, Lyman. Good evening, Mayor Malchow and members of the council. My name is Doug McIntyre. I'm a planner with the Department of Community Development. As Lyman had mentioned, I'm here tonight to talk to you about the 2018 Comprehensive Plan amendments, specifically one of the 7 docketed items, which was the Parks element amendment to make consistency updates for the recently approved 2018 Pro Plan. So, to this point, you've heard several presentations from Parks employees as well as their consultants, and but tonight I'm from Community Development, and we're talking about the comprehensive plan. And the reason why that is because we're helping to facilitate the process in conjunction with the Parks Department to make consistency updates so that we can have an internally consistent comprehensive plan, which is a requirement of the Growth Management Act. So, with that being said, our 3 topic areas for tonight are just to briefly discuss the issue before the council, give you some background on the key facts and information, and then we will open public hearing and take testimony. So the central question in front of the council tonight is, does the council want to approve the docketed Parks element comprehensive plan amendment to bring the element into consistency with the Pro Plan? We are asking for action tonight. However, this is a little bit of a different process in the sense that because we are only allowed by state law to amend the comprehensive plan once per year, we are trying to find efficiencies throughout the year because there are 7 of them. So we are trying to hold public hearings while the plans are being updated or close to the approval of those plans. And then we will, at the end of the year, have a final reading of the consolidated ordinance that will combine all of the amendments throughout 2018 in order to comply with the Growth Management Act so that we can amend it once in 2018. So technically it is action, but the action will carry forward into the end of the year. If there's any questions on that kind of weird technicality, please let me know and I can further explain that. So in the packet, Exhibit 1 is the red line of the comp plan. And again, just a refresher that there are 2 volumes of the comprehensive plan. Volume 1 is the goals and policies, and then Volume 2 is more generally speaking the technical background. In this case, for the Parks element, the technical background is really just a reference to the Pro Plan. So the edits to that volume are pretty minimal. However, the edits to Volume 1 are more about the inventory of parks, updating some figures, and there is one minor policy change that I can discuss further if there are questions on it. I think, as I've indicated, the more important part here is really discussing the process. As the council's aware, the docket for 2018 was set at the end of 2017, and then in early 2018, the Pro Plan was discussed and then approved. And then again, tonight, we're here for the comp plan amendment, which will carry forward to the consolidated ordinance. So I think this is hopefully a good summary of the process to step you through what we're doing tonight. And really, that's pretty much it. It's pretty narrow and pretty straightforward. However, I'm here for question and answer, and then after that, we can presumably open the hearing.
I don't see any questions up here. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have a sign-up sheet back there for the hearing? Empty. Is there anyone that would like to address the council during the public hearing? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Any discussion? Deputy Mayor Hornish.
Move to approve the 18 docketed comp plan amendment for the Parks element to incorporate the 18 Pro Plan.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Bullet.
Yep. You got to push faster.
To the trigger. I just want to make sure, and we've said this before, that approving the plan does not preclude that we will have these items brought before us as we start to look at them in the budgeting cycles for the funding of it, and that we will still have a chance to identify and work on the different items.
That is correct.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By a vote of 7-0, we have approved that. Okay. Our next item of business is 12B, which is level of service clarification.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Steve Lenishevsky, our Public Works Director, will provide an introduction to this topic. This was a topic that was added a couple days ago by, I think we had 3 council members that wished to discuss it and put it on the agenda today. So we'll let Steve provide an overview, and we may actually have a consultant here.
I think I saw Kendra.
Okay, great.
Okay, so there. Good evening, Council. Steve Lenishevsky, Public Works Director. At the staff dais or table, we will have Kendra Breerlin with Fair and Peers, as well as Deputy Director Cheryl Paston. So, question came up, I believe, Tuesday morning. I don't know what day it is. Tuesday? Yesterday morning?
Last week.
On the level of services that we provided in Resolution 2018-782, which was moving forward with level of service D at intersections and allowed to go to E under the 2015 comp plan provisions for more than 5-leg approach intersections. The question raised was under minor arterials in the 2015 comp plan, those were set at level of service C. So we are reaffirming that that was in the resolution to go to D. So the question, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor Malchow, was raised of those 15 intersections, there's 15 that were under minor, that were at a level of service C before they became failure last time under the 15 plan. Question was raised, how many of those, if we go to D, become a failure because of the D and not the C? So we do have a table to be provided. The answer is 1.
Can you repeat that again from the 15 that are E? How do we get them to D?
No, the 15 originally under the 2015 comp plan are level of service C.
Okay.
We switched everything to D, maybe inadvertently, maybe not, but that's what we have now on the books. So it was asked of those ones that were C under the D proposed under 2018-782 resolution, how many of those went to a failure above C? I.e., if we left them at C, they would be failing or not. So if we left them at C, you would have 1 that is now a D. The other 14 remained as Cs or better. And there was another question, which Kendra is here also to run us through the model and what those assumptions that have been reintroduced and ran through on the model are. So I think at this point, if that's the C versus D discussion is clear, Kendra can run through model assumptions, and then maybe we can talk about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Hornish.
Well, I want to kind of clarify a little bit. I think that what precipitated this was comparing the 9 that we did when we talked about, when we inadvertently lowered it to D and didn't really understand that we were doing that. And I'm the one that precipitated this when I asked the question, how did we lose people, how did we lose intersections off of the 9 in that process? And I think there was an assumption by staff that we were going to approve it going from C to a D. And the language, if I can find it, was very confusing. I can't find it right now. Shoot. Hang on just a second. Where is the Fair and Pierce?
Yeah, that's it.
It is. It said, and this is, we have this in the consent item 7, yeah. But it was the same language as I recall, and I haven't had a chance to go back, but it said, which directed staff to develop an intersection-wide volume-weighted average delay approach with a level of service D with allowance for E where LOSD cannot be achieved per the 15 comp plan. What I took that to mean, just so you understand, and what was very unclear to me, that we were lowering it, the minors from a C to a D, what I took that to mean is what we had in the current comp plan that allows a D to go to an E, per that plan, we're keeping with that same plan. There was nothing in that direction that we gave you, in my mind, that said we want to lower it from a C on the minors to a D. It was only by happenstance when I started, how did we lose this, that we discovered this. And that's where we are tonight. Now, I think the follow-on question was, then how many other ones should have been on there that staff had presumed we were going to lower it to a D and E? And the answer was none. It was just that one that previously showed up and had now been taken off because of the assumption that we were going to approve it going from a C to a D and E. Correct? That's what you're saying. There's only one of the minor arterial intersections that should be added to the failing intersections.
Correct.
Okay. A little more history, but just more background to better understand it in my mind anyhow.
Yeah, and I'll concur that my understanding, which is why I re-asked the question per the comp plan, I think the understanding was that we were keeping everything the same as far as level of service at intersections. So there was...
That was not our understanding of what we proposed, so we apologize for any miscommunication that may have happened.
I'll apologize on behalf of council. There was some misunderstanding for sure.
Yeah.
So, and again, how we're going through this, and maybe Kendra can walk us through, right, we're going through the look at these 43 intersections right now at a D. That does not mean that it can't be changed once we come to the analysis part and we get into project parts. That's fine. We also have talked about reducing some because maybe in the 6 and 20-year plans, some of these, level of service D or C, they stay at A's, B's, and C's, and we don't need them on this list, right? So there's lots of change that can still occur on what is the final list, but the question that was answered has been answered with the one of the C's is a D.
Right.
And if you will note, that is number 11, we call it, so 242nd and 8th. And again, outside of improvements to the intersection, right, some things can be managed through operational changes. We've been put on notice this week that the school district is proposing, it's not done yet, they have to go through their board as well, but just for example, so East Lake comes off 233rd in the roundabout on Northeast 8th for East Lake High School. You have Inglewood Hill Middle School, which is 242nd and 8th. Those right now have a 10-minute gap between start times. So they're proposing a 20-minute span between bell times next year. And then between the middle school and the elementary school, around the corner off of 244th and 8th, between Inglewood Hill Middle School and that school, that currently has a 40-minute span between bell times. That's proposed to go to 60. So as we kind of stretch these times out, some of these things may
resolve
simply
itself
resolve themselves.
without us doing a thing.
Yes,
We're
not that we're
spending a
not going to
dollar.
look and watch, but I mean, some of those things are outside of a $10 million improvement or a $500,000 improvement. So I guess time is of the essence as well. So just nothing set in stone, but if council wants to deliberate, maybe we'll let Kendra touch in on just reaffirming, because I think the other question raised was, can you please remind us and reaffirm what the model changes were between summer of 17 and then where we are today, assumptions, inputs, et cetera. So Kendra is here for that if there's no other questions.
I've got
about
one more
this.
question up here
Sure.
before we move over to Kendra. Councilmember Stewart.
So I just want to make sure I understand the table. So the far left column, the X's are the intersections that are currently in the comp plan.
Correct.
And then you have the existing level of service, meaning what's, again, currently in the comp plan.
Currently
Okay,
adopted
and then
comp
the one that's highlighted in yellow is the only one that would fail if it remained as a C.
Correct.
Well, it would,
But that would be a failure on a minor arterial intersection.
if we
Unless we change it to a D.
If we change it, so, and I just want to let you know, I understood the resolution that we voted on that said that they would all be a level of service D, so.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said that when we voted on the resolution where it said that we would move to 43 intersections, all with a level of service D, that's how I interpreted it, so.
Did you understand that we were going from a level of service C to D?
Yes.
For those 43.
For those ones that are minor arterials, yes.
I did not. I did not. I mean, I think we sat up here and had a deliberation about that very subject matter, which I think further led to the confusion, but Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, no, I had a likewise impression. In fact, we had a long discussion about if it even should be lowered further on it for looking at some of the deficiencies on it. So how it was described is how I understood it. So we're really right now talking about one intersection, is that correct? And so all this is now about one intersection that may not actually fail, but under the categories of being a minor arterial?
Well, but that's right now. We don't know what'll happen in the future.
I understand, but even if something happens in the future, as I understand it, we still have the ability to change that, as I understood what Steve was saying, so.
Deputy Mayor Hornish?
Yeah, let's go through that. So you have existing LOS and proposed LOS on this chart, right?
Correct.
So anything that says a C on existing, when it goes to a D, that's the number of intersections that would be affected by keeping this resolution in place as is, correct? So let's count them through. We have number 4. We have number 5. It's already failing anyhow.
Yeah.
We have number 8. We have number 11, which we just talked about. We have number 14. We have number 18. We have number 20. We have number 21, 22, 23, 24. We have 26. 32, which is already failing. 39. And 41. Anybody count how many of those are?
15.
15. So if we lower it from a C to a D, even though there only one is failing right now, we are saying that we are going to lower the quality of life for our citizens, potentially, by allowing this to go to a D on 15 intersections. And I don't know about you guys, but when I ran, I heard you guys say earlier, when you ran, traffic and trees, if we lower it from a C to a D, I don't think you were listening to what people were saying when you ran.
Councilmember Stewart.
I just want to point out, though, that 7 of those intersections aren't currently in the comp plan. So while it is 15 intersections, we're talking about adding 20 additional intersections to the plan.
Can we ask why that is?
May I finish? So I just want to make sure that we're calling out that we're not talking about lowering the quality of service. We're going to measure more. We're going to measure 20 more intersections, and half of those 15 are part of the newly added. So we weren't including those today as part of concurrency anyway.
So I think I can speak
It's not that I'm saying we shouldn't change it. I'm just trying to make sure that we're clear to people, because they don't have the luxury of seeing the whole thing. They only get
they've got a piece of it
They only
up
have
there.
15 of the 43 that they can see.
So I think part of the reason that we decided to add, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the intersection was to capture, first of all, Klahani and the intersections inside there. We can't do anything impact fee-wise with Issaquah Fall City Road unless you capture the intersections that are out there.
I'm not arguing with adding
Okay,
them.
hold on 2 seconds. So the second element of that is driver experience. If we fail to capture more intersections, we fail to look at the driver experience, which is ultimately, I think, where I'd personally like to go with our LOS. So I think adding in the additional intersection is another way that we've got a measuring stick. I would liken removing those to looking at Eastlake Sammamish Parkway in the north end, where we have no checks and balances there past Inglewood Hill. There is not another intersection that we get to look at outside of it. And so if we start picking out intersections and say, well, we're not going to measure there.
I never said, I'm just
saying, I think it's a
clarify the record. I did not say
We've got to go by
remove.
our buttons. And okay, so I just my point is that I think it's doing our citizens a service by looking at more intersections, because it speaks to driver experience. Okay, I've got Councilmember Ritchie.
Couple questions, Steve. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate you taking the time to prepare this for us so we can better understand, make more well-informed decision.
You can thank staff and our consultant team who worked
Thank
most
you,
all
guys.
day getting it done.
This is helpful. Kind of helps us clarify where we're at. There's obviously a lot of confusion, and we're trying to understand. First thing, I'm seeing under here, under number 11, 242nd at Northeast 8th. It says signal. So is that a potential, I understand, but is that what we're trying to, what is that saying there? Is that we're trying to, what is the purpose? If that's, you're just declaring what's there, or?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
With it there, it's currently a level C. Okay. So secondarily, my question is, based upon what we've talked about and my understanding of the conversation before, is that while we are not at we hear a lot, the mayor was just discussing a plan down the road. And there are those of us that think there should be a different measurement for concurrency, driver experience, defining what that means, using different data. That's not where we're at right now. And for the purposes of where we're at right now, we're using the intersection level of concurrency. So based upon that, we're taking a snapshot in time, right? We can look at the other snapshots farther down the road and apply different data and apply different models to that later on, right? But for what we have right now, using intersection level data, this is the intersection level of service. This is the most recent data we have. And after we get the data and plug in the new intersection level of service and we get to a comp plan amendment, we have the capacity as a council, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. We have the capacity as a council now, if the majority votes to lower the level of service at any one of these intersections from a C to a D or raise it to a B. We can do what what a majority chooses to do at that point. When do we get to decide that?
Well, we have final adoption of this comprehensive plan on July 17th. So that's when the final decision and adoption needs to occur. We're, of course, going to be out in front of this body a number of times talking about this topic. The next important checkpoint will be on April 17th, I want to say it is, when we're going to bring kind of what the 6-year outlook is. So really, that'll be the final answer in terms of the intersections that are either passing or failing concurrency.
Based upon the new concurrency model.
Correct.
So April 17th, that's a great answer. That's news to me. Thank you. That's what, so, silly question. What is this? This is to show us where we are right now using our existing concurrency model.
That is correct. That's using 2016 counts and intersection configurations. I think, a big piece of kind of making sure that you're comfortable with how we're looking at things is really just showing, hey, look, we've taken the data that's in the field today, and this is what we're seeing.
So this would be a good tool to compare this compared to what we get on April 17th, to see what intersection level of concurrency looks like versus what we have right now.
Correct. On April 17th, what you will see is assumptions made about the projects that will be constructed over the next 6 years. It also will take into account the development that has been approved, such that we're taking into account additional traffic volumes that could be on the road by that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie, can you just pull your button off? Councilmember Ross?
The way I look at this so far is process. We are changing so many factors that we're confusing everybody.
Including ourselves.
Including the council. And let me just lay out the way my mind works on this. First of all, we need to start with the baseline. The baseline includes an assumed level of service. We have 23 intersections in the comp plan. Keep them the same. The 20 additional that already have a level of service that are being looked at, keep them on the current assumptions. We've changed variables. What are we changing as we continue to work this? T8, we're removing the capacity considerations. Take that out. The impact of that is this. Update for more current traffic data. That's the next assumption change. And we also have new assumptions that we're considering, but we got to be really transparent. An example of a new assumption is 2-lane left turns. That further improves your impact. We also have to have a conversation on the 20 additional, what the purpose of the 20 additional. Largely, it's to have a better proxy of the driver experience. Again, let's be transparent. We keep accumulating all these factors at once, and that's why I don't want to lower the level of service to level D on the minor arterials at this time. I want to keep that status. And then finally, what's not even mentioned yet is we need to align the TIP funding and non-funded elements to each of these intersections as well on this chart eventually. When we get all that information, then we look at the intersections, we look at quick fixes, we look at funding, we look at our long-term plans. But we've got to be systematic and methodical, and we're changing too many variables at once.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Hornish.
Well said, thank you. And I totally agree, which is why I think we should leave it at a C for now. That doesn't mean we can't change it later when we get to the funding in particular. But in that regard, maybe, I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I'd like to better understand. We added 20, 15 of which are minor arterials that had a LOS of C before. But let's just focus on the 20. We talked about we're adding additional intersections to better capture driver experience. But we also incorporated Klahani in here. This is another change that we've got to keep in mind, right? Do we have an idea of the 20, how many were because of Klahani versus just because we wanted to better approximate the driver experience?
And I'll confirm that, Cheryl, that was 3, right? I think there were 3 of those.
I believe it was 3.
Only 3 were in Klahani?
So number
3 of the 20.
3 of the 20.
3 of the original.
Well, let's focus on the 20 first, but say, and those 3 are failing too under the new analysis?
Actually, so, just walking through kind of some of the steps here. So the first step, of course, was actually adding AM. So if we look at the first
variable,
the 20, the original 20, and we look at PM peak hour only, we actually have no failures, even when we retain the level of service C standard on the minor arterials. When you
Kendra,
add,
so we're all on the same page, the original 23.
23.
You said 20,
excuse me.
so we're all.
The original 23, okay.
Original
And then we
20.
added 20, yeah.
Only measured under PM.
Yes, we're only measured under PM.
Okay.
And in those cases, we didn't have any failure. When we introduced the AM peak hour of those original 23, that's the one intersection that's intersectional. Actually, wait a minute, do we have any? We don't have any failures in the original group, even with the AM peak hour added. So it is of the 20 that were added where we do have some failures. And so we have 8 failures that are identified by adding the 23 under AM and PM peak hour. So one of the 2 peak hours that is not achieving the level of service D standard. And then when we go back to having level of service C with the minor arterials, we have 1 intersection that is tripping that with a level of service D. So that's a total of 9.
And 14 other ones that might eventually, they're still at a C, I'm sorry, unless we change it carte blanche to a D.
Of those intersections where we're talking about, those are all in kind of the level of service A through C territory. So I understand your question. Because these are minor arterials, these are fairly low volume streets, it's not anticipated that within the near term that
I
they would be
appreciate
tripping.
that. But they still, the LOS is a C now, unless we, well, it's actually a D right now, but we're saying we didn't know, we're thinking maybe we didn't understand we did that, so we want to change it back to a C, to be technical.
That is correct. In the policy that's on the books today, I actually believe until you adopt your new comprehensive plan, it is the C.
Yeah, that's fair. So let me just make sure I got that. So we added 20. 8 of them now fail, and we only have 1 for the C. Okay, I got it. But we have 14 other ones that are still level C if we keep it at a C.
It's actually 9 failures, Tom.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
If you, with the.
Well, 8 plus the 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about that. And I think there was a comment that Councilman Ritchie said that it's currently a C on number 11, which is 242nd Northeast 8th. No, it's a level of service C, is a D in the AM. So it's failing right now. That'd be the one that we would be adding back in if we change the minor arterial back to a level of service C.
That is correct, although what I will add in there is, again, for identifying concurrency deficiencies, we will be looking out, and that's when I come back on April 17th, where we'll be talking about if there's any tip improvements. If we know more about the schools at that point, it may be reasonable to relook at the volumes at that intersection. So again, we don't know at this point, but your question is valid.
Okay. One more comment. You said we made these changes and then we did it because we added the AM. But the other, and I go back to Councilman Ross's comment, we're making other changes that I don't think you did address as far as to the model, the latent delay and other tweaks to the model that also caused some things to get worse under the predicted LOS, the modeled LOS.
If you'd like, I could quickly go through some of the modifications.
I think it'd be good, just so, to your point, that we understand what all these changes are.
Absolutely. So first would be on the volume perspective. Things that have been, first of all, we did find some errors in the work that was done last summer, and so those were modified. There were some places where volumes were misentered, and so as we've done kind of a more thorough look, we found a few locations where the volumes were wrong, and so we have updated them. A second place is that council has directed us to really look at the school peak hour, and a different AM peak hour was being applied, and so we updated the volumes for the AM peak hour to reflect that. So that's on kind of the volume changes that have occurred since last summer. In terms of model calibrations, we've updated the peak hour factors to be more accurate to what we're seeing. Before, they weren't as calibrated and individualized to intersections, and so that has been fixed. Also, to the extent that there have been some updates to infrastructure that's in place, for example, flashing yellow arrows, those are things that we have made modifications to be more adaptive to what's in the field today. We have one of the items that's come up tonight lightly is the concept of two-way left turn lanes along 228th. And actually, the newer HCM, highway capacity manual methodology, it's funny, while it's newer, it's got some tweaks and some limitations, and it actually does not account for the presence of two-way left turn lanes, which actually helps people to get out onto 228th and to make their turn more easily and to merge into traffic. And so the HCM 2000 methodology actually does account for that. And so in a couple of locations where we do think it's appropriate, we did update to reflect, and that's very consistent with what other communities are doing. And then last but not least, just U-turn locations, making sure that our model is being really reflective to what's on the ground today. Those are things that have been updated.
Thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, I think it's been said directly and indirectly. Right now, we've made so many changes and variables that no one understands what's really going on anymore. I challenge any citizen to understand what's been happening here. And as I understand it, we could, as an option, adopt the original 23 so that we have more of a baseline, as Councilmember Ross has said there, to be able to have more control of what was being done before all these other variables were being added in from the AM, from the latency of a delay that was added into there, to taking out the segment averaging, that it would be more of a baseline and understandable to our citizens, and have the other 20 kind of like the 7 that we do outside our city for informational purposes, and the council going forward begin to look at it. I mean, we've compounded the confusion even further, because even in this discussion, 2 of our council members, the mayor and deputy mayor, talked about the real-time experience, but as Councilmember Ritchie said, we're not dealing with real-time experience now. We had decided that we're going to be dealing with the level of service at intersections, moving in the future to real-time experience. And even though we've added the INREX data, so I'm at the point where I think we should be holding, as Councilmember Ross, to a baseline so that people can understand what we're doing. I think we have a very dangerous situation to also look at some of these new in the 20 or the Klahani intersections. The Klahani intersections, past councils and the past city manager were very clear that Klahani was going to pay for itself going forward based upon the funds going on. I think we need a council discussion to see what are the implications if we take it. Will the pre-Klahani or the pre-existing pre-Klahani citizens then suddenly be on the hook for those intersections at Klahani? Because that would be a reversal of what was promised to the earlier citizens, that they would not be included in, and Klahani would be paying its way with that surplus revenue. So for that reason alone, those intersections should be taken out until a deeper dive is done to understand how those would be handled. It's just that's what the agreement was when we were taking Klahani in with our citizens, because there was concern as to how our money was going to be shifting back and forth. And it's not to short shaft the Klahani residents or not, it's but just to understand where are we and is there going to be a reversal on that policy that was established there. So going back to what Councilmember Ross had says, it makes more sense, it'd be more transparent, more understandable to stay with the first 23 that we had, have the other 20 as a informational, but in the comp plan, as far as adoption, let's stay there, and then we can analyze the information as we do this exercise and start taking them off as we see fit. A number of these, as I understood, that are even currently failing or seen to fail, like the Issaquah Pine Lakes Road, will be taken off shortly as Connor Jarvis puts that light up. I understand it'll raise it to a level B, and others are likewise in that, so that we can understand it and not give a sticker shock to our current citizens by doing it. So I would, I don't know if we have to decide that today or on April 19th, but I'd like to propose that we stay with the 23 that were the original ones and move the other 20 into an informational basket, but on the comp plan, work only on the 23 and understand it clearly. Thank you.
Councilmember Moran.
Okay, first I want to say that this is my first round, so I'm still holding my second round. I'm not getting chipped out of a round. But I want to state, for somebody who has lived on the north end of the city for 30 years in different areas, the reason that and everybody keeps saying the additional intersections, they're not additional, they just weren't counted before. They are part of the same road network. So the problem that we ran into, and this came from this is one conversation I did have with Mr. Odell. The reason that those were added in is because of areas such as the comp plan. It takes you can look at Safeway and you're going all the way to the end of the city and you have no idea what's going on in those intersections on 228th on that whole north end of Sahalli. So for people who live on the north end of the city, we have got to look at all those intersections. And without looking at a lot of those intersections and looking at each intersections along the way, it doesn't tell you what is happening on the road. So before we start picking apart and saying that we're taking part, it was put in not only for driver experience, but it was put in there because in some areas of our city, we have long areas where we do not have, where we do not have a lot of traffic lights, or we do not have in the comp plan, we have long spaces in between where we do not have regular information. So we can't go back to just the comp plan.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for the record, at the last meeting I was misinterpreted. When I bring up clarifying information, it doesn't mean that I'm disagreeing or agreeing with anything. So I wasn't saying that we should not, I wasn't saying that we should or should not add the 20. I just wanted to be clear, since the people who are watching don't have the whole list in front of them, that when Deputy Mayor Hornish made the statement that we were lowering the levels of service at intersections, those intersections were never counted before, so their level of service was not counted at all. So I wasn't saying that we shouldn't make them be a C or a D, I just wanted to point that out. So I'm clarifying that for the record so that I don't have to do that on Facebook tomorrow morning. So I think that's, and same for you, Councilmember Moran. I wasn't saying that we shouldn't add them, I was just merely trying to point out that many of those, 7 of those that are currently level Cs. The other thing I want to make sure people look at when they look at it again, is look at the type of control, because the level of service is a different number depending on the intersection control. So again, it's not a static number. It depends on what kind of traffic control device it is, what that wait time is.
Okay, got Councilmember Ritchie.
Why are we adding more intersections? What was there before? Maybe my mic's not on, huh? Let me try that again. Better. I'm trying to understand why we're adding more intersections. I understand from what Councilman Moran said that they weren't in there before, but is that the reason why we're choosing to add more intersections at this point now, based upon the new level of service, the new intersection level of service? We want to get more data from more intersections. Is that what's going on? I mean, I'm just trying to understand why we're adding more intersections. Is there a reason why?
Driver experience.
But we're not measuring driver experience.
Exactly.
It's a proxy for measuring
Remember,
driver
this was the halfway
experience.
between where we were going to driver experience?
We gotta use our buttons.
So, okay. I'm sorry, I mean, we may wind up going there. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. Driver experience is, I'm not sure what that means. I mean, I get it in my own life. I know what that means to me personally, right? My own driver experience. And I hear about it from constituents that they have a certain level of personal experience, but I don't know how we measure that. What I'm curious is, again, I don't understand, outside of a measurement we're not taking now, for a system we're not using now, whether driver experience, we call it something else later on, based upon the proposed level of service, the proposed concurrency measurement tool that we're using, intersections. What is the benefit of adding more versus using what we have? I'm not passing judgment. I'm asking what the purpose is, short of this a proxy, as the mayor discussed. Is that it, or?
Mayor, if I could take another
please.
stab at that. So initially, one of the main reasons why staff recommended that we add more is because on these intersections, we were seeing an increased traffic. And so we wanted to be able to track it over time. At that time, we didn't have the lexicon of driver experience. It was, we really wanted to monitor how those intersections were functioning and performing over time. And if that helps. And part of it too, I think.
If you're, keep going if you're.
Just want to try, I mean, I appreciate that, but I'm curious as to what, Councilmember Valderrama was talking about. We're gathering data from these intersections now. We weren't before. We are now. And the question is, trying to paraphrase, do we plug in this new data now to this new, I'm going to call it short-term stopgap intersection level, right? Thinking that there's something else coming down the road, and there may very well be. I don't know, but that's the plan. I get it. Are we gaining anything other than more potential failing intersections? Again, I guess it goes to, I keep referring to the TMP, but I'm trying to understand, short of a driver experience, we're now measuring these. Is it informational, or are we adding a whole new, to Councilmember Ross's scenario, which I think is important to underscore, are we adding more complications? Are we kind of spiraling out of control, or are we trying to say, here's a group, here's a focus area, here's a new measurement tool, let's focus on these, let's get this dealt with, and then 6 months, 2 years down the road, we have gathered this new information from this expanded list, and let's plug it into this new driver experience concurrency model, whatever we define driver experience to mean at that point, right? It's kind of like, it's an interesting statement. I don't know what it means yet, but once we define it, would we then plug those in? Are there going to be 20 more intersections that we're going to plug in? I guess I'm trying to understand, does adding more benefit our goal by the April 19th and then the updating the comp plan? Does it help that, or does it obfuscate it? More to Councilmember Ross's statement.
So if I may, I'll start with that. And in full disclosure, I was not a part of the team that helped define this group of now 43 intersections. So it's really just as an outsider who's worked with a lot of different communities on their comp plans, looking in and also thinking about the true intent of concurrency and level of service, and just what the state kind of thinking around that is. And of course, the state provides communities with wide berth in terms of what how do they want to craft their level of service policies? Specifically, what facilities do they want to measure? State law does say that, we should be looking at least our arterial routes and measuring level of service along those routes. When I look at a map of the city in terms of the intersections that have been identified in these 43, I'm not going to speak to every single one, but it's a pretty good group. And when we think about concurrency and what we're trying to do with concurrency, really what we're trying to say is, as we allow our community to grow, are we also staying true to what we said in our comp plan in terms of how we said that our facilities would operate? And so by narrowing our lens and looking at fewer intersections, we're looking at fewer places and we're measuring fewer places over time. So by keeping the group of 43, it's a wider barometer, it's a deeper penetration, it's a deeper look at the community. And so it's ultimately a policy call in terms of the intersections that you want to use. But I will say, as a practicing professional that's worked in a lot of communities, this, for the size of Sammamish, this group of intersections is not atypical.
It's not atypical. Thank you.
So I want to speak to a few things before we go into round 3 and 4 here. I want to highlight again that impact fees cannot be used for Issaquah Falls City Road if you use the original intersections, because that will preempt the use of impact fees there. Will not. If we don't add these intersections in, there will be no failures on Sahalli. No failures, because I'm looking at nothing fails. I'm looking at the level of service and nothing fails. That is not recognizing what is going on the street. I don't think that ignoring what's truly going on as far as that driver experience, and that driver experience is being stuck in traffic and not being able to move at a normal rate of speed, or one that's even, a percentage of that speed. I don't think it's good policy to ignore that. And so I use Sahalli as an example because with the additional intersections, we have, I think, at least 4 additional failures that are identified on the north end on Sahalli. Whereas if we don't use those new intersections, we have no failures on Sahalli. Ask anybody if Sahalli is failing. It's failing. And ignoring those failures is not good policy. Councilmember Valderrama.
All right. First, I want to go back to what Councilmember Stewart said about Facebook. If I ask clarifying questions, I may or may not be in that direction. So I just want that to be known on the record. More often than not, I am. So going back here, I guess I've got to go and look at this from 3 levels. I think we need to take the confusion out. We're continuing to add confusion in what's going on by this. And even in this discussion, we go back to having 3 people mention driver experience. When I was with staff sitting down and we were talking about driver experience with Councilmember Ross and Moran, we were told that was uncharted territory to figure out how we're going to go there, much less define it. But that's something that we're going to have to work on in the future. Right now, this council had said level of service at intersections. And while we've added other variables, let's try to stay with the 23. We can still look at the other 20, look at them for informational purposes, and as Councilmember Ritchie said, start pulling them out. Sahalli, that's been raised, and first of all, of segments, I live on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, and so that's a longer segment without lights to go through, so I lived through that experience. But Sahalli was pulled off twice because we were saying in the end, the changes we do to Sahalli, unless we address how we get out of our city, is just moving the bottleneck further down. And as I like to say, and it annoys Hamilton, it's putting lipstick on a pig, because then we just go to the bottom of the gray barn, and that's where we're all stacked up again. In fact, that's why twice we pulled it out, and we said we would put it on the transportation master plan, which has now been thrown out as we look at concurrency. I go back to my comments earlier on, and the drawback, I mean, you were asking Councilmember Ritchie, what are the benefits? The drawbacks are we're finding more deficiencies in this 20. That's where they're stacked, that our citizens will have to assume instead of developers that are coming on, and in the end, it doesn't help them get off the city. So I repeat the line, instead of weaponizing concurrency, we should have probably weaponized SEPA that does look at those exchanges with Redmond and with Issaquah. In fact, those 7 that are mentioned, you know, the 23 plus 7, the reason we keep 7 is so when there are SEPA actions in Redmond and Issaquah, we're able to give feedback to them. And likewise, Redmond has their plus that includes Sammamish, and we'll be sharing that information. So driver experience, we're not there yet. We still have to define it. I don't see that benefit. We can still track this information, but let's not kid ourselves. Even if we were to work and spend all that money, our citizens will still be furious because they're just going to be stuck there putting lipstick on that pig. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Moran.
Nice speech. But first of all, the Highway Capacity Manual calls for driver experience. It's not new. The county did a study on it years ago, and they actually use it. And they actually and their study shows great benefit from it. And that study was even done by our own consultants. So to say that it's something not used, I don't even know where that theory comes from. So we're not going to go there. Second thing is to say that we shouldn't put these things on the list because, hey, if we do it, then we have to fix it, and then we're just going to get stuck at the edge of town. Well, here's the other side of that. If we don't put it on a list, then we can't collect funds for it. If we don't collect funds for it, how are we ever going to work with Redmond or Issaquah to fix the problems that are on the edge of town? And we have to collect money to work with those cities to do something. I refuse to think that we cannot work with the cities around us to try to fix those problems. And that's my round 2, by the way.
I'm hoping we don't go for round 3 and 4.
He's already on 3.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
I think I'm on 3, to be fair. I want to address what Councilmember Moran just said. Fair and Pierce did the King County time of travel concurrency, did it not?
Yes, and I'd be happy to explain the differences in this
please?
community.
Yes.
So King County uses INRAC's data. That's really exciting. It was
Which we now have access to.
Yes, which was a big change for them. They used to have all their county employees go drive all the different segments with like GPS units in
Once
their
a year,
cars.
yeah.
Yes,
A
it was
week,
crazy.
a
It was
week I think it
insane.
took them to do, or something.
Yes, and it was a
yeah.
nightmare
Yeah.
for staff. And now, fortunately, our partners of INREX have provided us with this wonderful kind of data source. And actually,
So, but wait 1 second. So that means they were using time of travel even before NREX came about.
Yes.
They were out there experiencing it and having their people going out to do it.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
Maybe we should just do a poll of our citizens.
But there are some real distinctions between Sammamish and King County. First of all, King County doesn't have an impact fee program anymore. They used to. So, in terms of having measured deficiency, it's not as big of a deal to them. It's not in terms of, this project can no longer get this portion.
They don't use it,
having
so
to do the
they
math.
don't use
Yes.
it like we do.
They don't use
Yeah.
it. And I'm actually going to go back to the impact fee item if I can at the very end. The second piece of that is that King County is shrinking more so than it is growing. So as a part of the work, we actually aren't really forecasting out. So as Sammamish is looking out 6 years and being really thoughtful about how much growth have we approved and what are the projects on our 6-year TIP, we don't do that in King County. And so in terms of measuring time of travel and how that's going to change with growth in traffic, that's actually not something that King County is doing. So that's the uncharted perspective
The
of this.
modeling of
yes.
yeah,
And then
okay.
the third is they just really don't have a robust project list like the city of Sammamish does. The last item that I did want to address is the item around impact fees. And, this council is extremely savvy about impact fees. So, high impact fee rate and a high level of education is very evident along this council. But what I would say, a common misnomer is that if a project is shown as a deficiency, that it can get zero impact fee dollars. That is not true. If a project has a deficiency to it, what we do is we calculate out kind of the portion of the improvement that would be addressing that deficiency. So again, it's not to say that these projects can't benefit from impact fees. What needs to happen is that math to figure out what portion of these projects can't benefit from impact fees.
Thank you. That is critical to understand that. 2 more comments, and I just want to address, if we go from 43 3 back to 23. I am not okay with that because I thought this was a better approximation for using intersection LOS as a proxy of time of travel, which we didn't want to go down, and it was a compromise. But to go back to 20 is like, whoa, that changes the whole compromise in my book. But even more importantly, in that same regard, Cheryl, you mentioned it. These 20 intersections were added by staff under the old concurrency program before we had a moratorium, before we started talking about concurrency in June of 17, under the old system using segments and the intersection. Was it not? It was in June of 17 when we had these 43 intersections, even before we started doing anything and talking about a new concurrency program. So it wasn't, nobody's trying to play a game here to try to say we're going to adopt a new concurrency and add in intersections. It's something that was done even before we started talking about it.
Councilmember Stewart.
So I want to go back to something I said at the last meeting, and that is that I think we all want to get to the fixes, right? And so we all agreed when we passed the resolution that we needed to stay laser focused on the end game. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of wrap this up, right? Like we agreed on the 43, right? I think we're good there. I think the question that we need to find out is, do we need to, are you guys proposing that we need to amend our resolution, or we've just clarified what the language means, or whatever that is, so that we can make sure that staff can stay focused on getting that list done, right? Getting their work done, so that we can hit our dates in April and July, because I think that's what's really important, is that we can stay on schedule. And I think, Deputy Mayor Hornish, that was one of your big concerns. So I just want to make sure that we, as a body, don't create any additional churn. Let's everybody stay focused and keep our eye on the prize. That's, I think, what we need to do at this point.
Okay, Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, on the 43, I think we should be looking at all 43. My comments were we need to be systematic and start with a baseline. What changed? What's the new version of this? What changed again? What's the new version of this? So we understand the variables and the changes and the assumptions and the corrections that are being applied. It also helps us understand potential quick fixes, such as flashing yellows or two left turn lanes, those types of attributes that are not expensive in some cases, that can be applied to other deficiencies. And to Mayor Malchow's point, I don't want to go down to 23 and build up, because I want to make sure when we look at the 20, what is our concurrency opportunity funding? So you mentioned, I think, Issaquah Falls City Road. If it's not in the comp plan inclusion, we got a problem from a funding standpoint there. So we really need to get systematic process, clearly document the change in assumptions. You talked to them today. Let's document them. Let's understand them and use them, that data, to help us make decisions.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, just going back on daily trips or time of travel was also, as we had seen with Councilmember Gerard in Vancouver, that was the one that was held up. Turned out when we started to really dig into that model and how they are doing it, it turns out that they are averaging or assigning homes average trips daily to the homes. That's how they were doing their actual time of travel. Wasn't quite what we thought it was, and if I'm not mistaken, their annual or their impact fees were $1,500 for transportation. Something like that. So that's another box that we have to look at. I'm very nervous. Well, first let me go back and mention that I'm supportive of what's being said. Keep the original 23 baseline, move the other 20, look at them, and then let's address those separately than the 23, so that we have the transparency, consistency on the original 23. We don't inherit the deficiencies until we've had the chance to look at them. I'm very concerned of what was promised to our citizens, and we had Lee Felling and everybody here saying, don't renege on how you handle Klahani. There are intersections, at least 2 or 3, that are failing in Klahani. What is the implications if we take them on and say they're failing? Are we now passing them to all of our 64,000 citizens, or are those going to be separated? I think there has to be a discussion. And that's why I think we should keep those 20 out, look at them and deal with them separately so that we recognize what we are doing, which are the quick fixes, because we've been told some of these are quick fixes, which of these can still be put on the TIP to address. But to just take lock, stock, and barrel, we're socking it to our citizens, and we're going down without fully having had a robust discussion on these different items. Thank you.
Councilmember Moran.
Well, I'm not going to use the socking it to our citizens or any of that other stuff because I don't have the buzzwords in my mind yet. But I am going to say that I do think that we need to stick with what has been the plan since last July, and that is the 43 intersections. It's what we all agreed to. When we all came on board, we agreed that the happy medium between where we were starting and where we were going, which was driver experience, we need to stay focused. We need to keep the ball rolling. The happy medium is where we are. This was it. I agree. If we remove those, really, then the deal's off the table, basically. So we're either going to then start all over, or we're going to leave the 43 intersections together.
Okay, I don't have any more buttons up here.
I'm going to push a button.
Great.
I would move that we revise, and I can't pull it up because the link's not working, Resolution 2018-782 to clarify that the minor arterials do not change from a level of service C to a D, as was in there, but remain at the level of service C. That's the only change I think we need to address right now.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none. Oh, okay.
So
Councilmember
close.
Stewart.
You almost made it in. That was there. And again, I just want to ask the clarifying question that this resolution is just to give the guidance to staff. We'll still decide on April 17, based on everything else, what the final stuff is. Okay, great. Thank you.
And it will be a new resolution. I don't know what the number will be, but it'll be a resolution. And we'll just go back and, I guess it's to revise 2018-782. Instead of changing a C on a minor arterial to a D, it remains at a C. If that's what the motion is. That's what the motion is, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All those in, so that was a vote of 7-0. I'm assuming I didn't hear any, I didn't hear a lot of ayes there. Okay. By a vote of 7-0, we will revise, what is it? Our 2018-782.
Mayor,
Thank you for the clarification.
if I could respond to Councilmember Valderrama's question about the two intersections in Klahani. Those are intersections 3 and
Kahani, yeah.
9.
3, 8, 9.
I thought there was 3, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, but, well, 3 and 9 are being addressed by the Issaquah Falls City Road
I'm sorry,
project
3 and 9 are
already.
what?
They're already part of the Issaquah Falls City Road project, so they are being, that level of service deficiency is being addressed.
And 8?
Isn't failing.
Is not in there.
And it's not filling, yeah.
It's not part of that
All
project.
right.
This is nice, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for staff putting that together. I appreciate that. Okay, so does council want to entertain taking a break before we dive into stormwater? Okay. Very good. So,
Sammamish 5?
yes, we'll take a 5-minute break.
That's what I said.
All right, we're going to get rolling here again. Our next order of business is an ordinance amending the Sammamish Municipal Code Title 13 related to surface water. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to turn things over to Steve Liniszewski and Tony Dizelle, who will lead us through a discussion on this particular item.
Well, Steve will introduce it. Steve won't lead it.
Okay.
So good evening again, Mayor and Council. Steve Liniszewski, how it works. Tony Dalzell, Senior Storm, is here. We're going to give Cheryl a break from the workbench for a little bit. Just to make sure, too, we understand, we had General Manager Jay Krause earlier. We are working towards the code changes and the memorandum of understanding to the previous code work. That wasn't relative, like he can correct me if I'm wrong, to tonight's work. But nonetheless, want to just make sure we're clear on that. And we are working with the district on that MOU. So with that said, item number 2 that was pulled is parked right after this. So we'll roll from these items right into that one. So if that's...
One question before that, you mentioned again, is there any more work on the MOU, or is that all now stopped?
That is not stopped, so the city's draft is back over to the district.
So we understand from this evening's testimony from Mr. Kraus that now the district is not wanting to proceed further with the MOU. So we'll talk to them about kind of the schedule for code amendments that they feel are necessary for groundwater protection. But so the MOU sounds like it may be stopped based on Mr. Kraus's comments tonight.
But you did not know it was stopped apparently until now.
No.
Okay, thank you. That's odd.
So thank you, City Council, and the public for listening to the Stormwater Code amendments. Thank you for allowing me to bring them to you again. It's a very complicated code regulation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and try to explain more of it to you this evening. So you're going to see some new and old items that you've seen in the past. This is one of them. It starts with the project background. In 2014 and 15, the City Council at that time adopted more stringent regulations within the Inglewood Historic Plat for stormwater regulations. They required more stringent drainage review and tightline for projects in the Inglewood Historic Plat area because of erosion and flooding problems that they witnessed. In 2016, the City Council adopted citywide stormwater code updates in accordance to our requirements of our NPDES state permit. In 2017, the City Council asked staff to take a look at this code again and specifically take a look at the Inglewood Historic Plat stormwater regulations. We proceeded to do that and also had some public input during that time. In September and October of this year, we did meet with the Planning Commission, who recommended the stormwater code amendments that are before you this evening. And then from November of last year to now, the council has been reviewing and deliberating these code amendments. So under these code amendments, there are 4 distinct items that I want to discuss with you this evening. They can be adopted separately without issues with other items being adopted of these 4, but I think you want to hear them comprehensively. So I'd ask that we go through all of these items first, and then you have your questions. So the question from me to you is, what thresholds should be set to appropriately protect critical drainage areas? Right now, the threshold is at a 0 square footage, and there are steps in between 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000 that we'll discuss this evening. I wanted to start with a little bit of the big picture. And some items to note are that critical drainage areas are about 25% of the city land area. In 2017 to 18, we've had 1 permit application that has proposed a small improvement, less than 500 square feet in a critical drainage area. And we know of 2 others who haven't yet submitted because of our current regulations. Also in these critical drainage areas, we've had 10 permit applications for new standalone homes. So these are separate from subdivisions and short plats, but on vacant lots, standalone homes. In the Inglewood Plat area, we have not had any applications ever submitted for a single-family home on one of the legal lots there, in which they are 2,500 square feet. In most cases in that area, they take 3 of those lots to total 7,500 square feet to create one single-family home. And in the Beaver and Pine Lake areas, we've had fairly consistent water quality levels for the last 20 years. We, as a city and in conjunction with King County, annually monitor these lakes for phosphorus and turbidity. Also, we have basin planning, which will be completed in most of the city within the next 6 years, and in which we'll be able to identify and prioritize CIP projects that may include tightline projects in the future. We also will be coming back to you, believe it or not, in the next 6 years with new NPDES permit requirements that will update the drainage code. And then lastly, we do have additional opportunities to reassess the code as it is, or the code as it will be adopted. So I wanted to give you those kind of big picture items and then jump into the first item, which is our drainage review threshold. So stepping back a little bit, the question is, what is a critical drainage area? And we've defined it as an area that has to have more restrictive regulations than other areas within the city because of severe flooding, drainage, erosion, and sedimentation problems. And you'll see the strike through, that is something that we've added to eliminate the county-wide standard and require citywide standards. Another question is, what is drainage review in a critical drainage area? What does it look like? So when a developer or property owner comes in and they are in a critical drainage area and they're required to do drainage review, they have to hire a qualified professional engineer. This is going to be anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 expense to go through this green manual and tell us what their proposal is and how it meets all of the requirements in it. We'll review that, and typically that would cost an applicant anywhere from $5,000 to $1,000 in permit fees for just stormwater review. And the timeline for this is 3 to 6 months or more, really depending on the complexity of the project. And some of the public comment this evening correctly stated that there are conflicting sections in the code, which is why we do need to update the drainage review section of it. There are conflicts that resulted from changes that we adopted back in 2016. So what changes were made as part of that code? We added a new definition for critical drainage areas, which included landslide hazard drainage areas and areas that drain to Pine and Beaver Lake. And all of these areas within critical drainage areas required a drainage review under any circumstances, 0 square feet of development proposal. We also added a new definition for landslide hazard drainage areas, and we added a new threshold for it of 500 square feet or more of new impervious surface. And you can see how where the conflict is, where we've added a definition for critical drainage area, a definition for landslide hazard area that is also a critical drainage area, and the thresholds are different. The same conflict exists for the Inglewood Historic Plats, where no changes were made to the thresholds, but there are areas within the Inglewood Historic Plat area that are also critical drainage areas. And there are also areas within Inglewood Plat that are not critical drainage areas. The thresholds that staff recommends are to require drainage review when a development is proposing 500 square feet or more of new impervious surface in critical drainage areas. And we believe that this is a reasonable threshold since the drainage review adds significant time and cost burden to small projects that may not have significant impact to these critical drainage areas.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part, that may have limited impact?
Yes. You might ask, how will critical drainage areas continue to be protected if we raise the threshold for review from 0 square footage to 500 square feet? Drainage review is still triggered at a lesser threshold than the rest of the city. The rest of the city is at a 2,000 square foot threshold. And when thresholds are met, height lines through landslide hazard areas are required. Offsite analysis is also required without exemption. And this one, we haven't really touched on very much in the past sessions that I've had with you, but an offsite analysis is really the design engineer telling us where the stormwater goes now and if there are any problems with it. Problems with flooding, problems with erosion, and problems with water quality. And there are mitigation measures which must be taken under this core requirement when there are problems identified. And the critical core requirement number 8, when thresholds are met as well, water quality treatment is more stringent in critical drainage areas than in other parts of the city. It requires an 80% phosphorus removal as compared to 50% in other areas of the city. And then lastly, low-impact development is required without exemption in these critical drainage areas. There are some alternatives that the City Council may consider. The first is don't adopt any of these code changes under item 1, and we'll continue with the conflicts that we have between critical drainage areas, landslide hazard drainage areas, and Inglewood Historic Plat thresholds for drainage review. The City Council might consider a higher or lower threshold as an alternative to the 500 square foot threshold that staff recommends. And then in red, based on what I've heard from public comment and discussion with one of the council members, is we use a higher percentage, we use a percentage of the lot area, such as 35% and or a maximum density allowed as an additional threshold trigger. So this option is going to require some additional staff review and likely some additional public process in order to proceed with, if the council so directs.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
So I'm going to jump in. I like that alternative, just starting from the bottom up. I think it is a good idea for the smaller lots to consider a percentage versus just a square footage footprint. I would also add on the second bullet, instead of just saying a higher or lower threshold for the critical drainage areas, I want to split out, because before the landslide hazard drainage areas were not part of the critical drainage areas, correct? I would like to somehow delineate a landslide hazard drainage area in a critical drainage area as a slope or something at some percent, some 10%, 15% slope that has something less than the 500 in all the other critical drainage areas. I mean, I know what we're trying to do is trying to get a blanket for the city, but maybe we shouldn't try to incorporate the landslide hazard drainage areas into critical drainage areas. I think there's a big, big distinction, and I know Mayor Malchow said it months ago that there seems to be a difference, and I'll kind of give you my mindset. If we have a landslide, people could die. If we do something bad to the water of Pine Lake, that's really bad, but people probably aren't going to die. So I think there's a distinction between a landslide hazard drainage area that could cause a landslide hazard area to slide versus it's really critical in the critical drainage areas around the lakes as well, but not as critical because of the detrimental impact it could have for a landslide. So I think it needs to be bifurcated, in my mind anyhow.
Can I ask a follow-up question to you? In the beginning of your comments, you suggested that we further bifurcate the landslide hazard drainage areas with areas that
actually, the critical drainage areas
okay.
and the landslide hazard drainage areas somehow address how they are different with different review thresholds, instead of just saying all critical drainage areas have to be 500.
Okay, okay.
So if you have a critical drainage area with more than X% slope, it has a lower threshold than the 500 for other critical drainage areas.
Okay, so just clearly separating out landslide hazard drainage areas versus areas that drain to Pine Lake or Beaver Lake.
Yes, because that's what critical drainage areas are right now,
yeah.
yes. Yep.
Okay.
Councilmember Moran.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the threshold of 500 square feet of drainage. I would be wanting to go probably lower than that. I do like the percentage of 35%. I'm concerned mostly because when I look at what the Department of Commerce has, which is what guides the GMA, the Department of Commerce doesn't allow for exemptions in critical areas. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to allow for exemptions, right? And that doesn't make sense to me.
So just to clarify, a critical drainage area is not a critical area. So the Department of Commerce
in the GMA, it specifies that's listed as one of them.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. But last time I read it, the critical drainage areas are not listed as a critical area in our code.
Good. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, I kind of like where Deputy Mayor Hornish is going with excluding the landslide hazard drainage area. And I think we might want to just start with the definition in 681 that defines it. So we have a separate definition in our current code that we can extrapolate or take it out or exempt it or take it out from the 500 square foot or 35%, whatever we choose, for critical drainage areas. I'd like to seriously consider what Deputy Mayor Hornish is talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean change the definition of critical drainage area, but it could mean critical drainage areas 500 square feet or whatever criteria. However, landslide hazard areas subject to code 681 is at 0 or whatever level we choose.
Councilmember Valderrama.
I think that's a good point. I'm curious, what brought this forward? I know that we have the discrepancies in the languages, but did we have an issue either of legal challenge, or was it being brought forward because of the reasonableness, as you had cited earlier, for a smaller lot to be able to not incur those costs for a small work? But was there another type of an issue at play that brought this forward to us?
Brought it forward in the way that staff has recommended.
That's correct.
With the 500 square foot threshold. Yeah, really it was because these projects are small, less than 500 square feet, and there is significant effort in order to be done in order to have drainage review by the applicant. And we had previously set a 500 square foot threshold in the Inglewood area. That's really why.
So this is basically to allow reasonable use of a person's property with a little impact, as using your words that you had previously, that it would have little impact onto it. And if I'm correct, I think you cited earlier, we've only had one application for this. So even if you look at the cumulative across the city, we're only talking up to 3, as I understand it. You said that there might be.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at, is that we're not looking at a great handful of cumulative impacts, and especially not in 6 years' time when we'll be coming back to you with code amendments.
Okay, thank you.
I do like the idea of the percentage. I think 35% was thrown out. I'm not sure if that number was arbitrary or came from somewhere specific, but I like the idea of using a percentage. But I want to go back to what the deputy mayor was discussing, which was bifurcating the code. And I think I brought that up before, but I see there being a benefit in the areas of Pine Lake and Beaver Lake. If you consider that it might require someone building on Beaver Lake or Pine Lake to put in a large stormwater vault, in which case they would be taking out a bunch of trees potentially, which would be counterintuitive to what we want to do in those areas. So that's why I think moving in 2 directions would be helpful, so that we're not requiring tree loss to have stormwater vaults.
But the same could be said with tree loss in landslide hazard drainage areas for these small projects.
Ooh. Yeah, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Councilmember Moran.
I'm still really concerned over wanting to check the GMA against there being no exemptions in critical areas. I really want to I would like to have the time to have that checked.
We can certainly do that.
Councilmember Valderrama.
No, I'm not on.
Oh, that's the
I
deputy
just
mayor.
act like I
Sorry.
am.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
So I just caught, I'm sorry, did you have a comment?
So technology is our friend here. We can provide that definition from the Department of Ecology, if everybody would like to understand what a critical area as defined.
Actually, I was looking for it from the Department of Commerce.
Department of Ecology is the guiding body that manages sensitive area regulations.
Actually, I was looking for Department of Commerce, which manages the GMA.
They manage the growth management, but ecology manages the,
Which is about 10 years behind everybody else.
all right, moving on then.
So I just caught something that was said. You said there's only been one application in this that would be exempt if we go to 500. So the drive is not so much to make it, it's not so much the staff has to spend so much time, because if you've only had one, spend the time. I mean, it's not going to take that much. It's more for the citizens that don't have to go through the costs and everything. Is that right?
Absolutely.
I hadn't caught that before.
For the
so that's-
reasonable use
yeah,
of their property.
Yeah. Just, well, it's reasonable use, they can still build. This is whether or not they do get a drainage review and
That's
have to go
correct.
through that process. So there's two issues there, what they can build and whether or not it needs to be reviewed. So, okay, well, that was just interesting to me. I wanted to clarify that and make sure I understood it.
Steve, maybe you could find both of those, Ecology and Department of Commerce? Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
You can look in ours, 21 and 50.
Landslide hazard areas, maybe it's when we get into the core requirements where we can, when we get into the core requirements where we can figure out how to address so that we aren't requiring tree loss to manage the stormwater. So I think the thresholds is one part, and then what are the remediations, and what exemptions or what do we do in the core requirements to make sure we don't create tree loss, which would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to do.
So just, can I clarify? So what you're saying is different treatment if it's a landslide hazard drainage area, critical drainage area, versus just a normal critical drainage area.
I think that's what Mayor Malchow, the last time we talked about this, we talked about, right, I'm on the flat part right next to Beaver Lake. I'm going to use one way of how I want to deal with stormwater versus I'm on a steep slope somewhere in a critical drainage area and I want to deal with it.
It's going to take some work, but.
Right, but again, I'm making the distinction that there's what's the threshold that will trigger the review, which is what this 500 square
And then
feet
what
is, right?
happens, yeah.
And then there's how do we make sure that during the review, we don't say, oh, great, go take down all your trees so that you can manage your stormwater, because that's not really the intention, right?
So we might be getting slightly ahead of ourselves because the next
Sorry.
one is, no, it's fine. It was a good lead-in to
Yeah.
the exceptions
We
to the core
planned that.
requirement. But
It sounds like a good number of the council members are interested in staff reviewing a percentage of lot area as an additional threshold trigger. And that would apply to both areas that drain to Pine Lake and Beaver Lake and to landslide hazard drainage areas.
I think that's right.
that's what I'm hearing.
I'm getting a bunch of head nods. That's good.
And I think when we talked, so the 35%, I believe, comes from King County, and that would be a total lot coverage. But as we discussed, that may not be the right percentage. So you guys may want to look at that, because in some instances, it's actually too low.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at a 1 acre lot, 35% is about 15,000 square feet, and obviously you don't want to go that high. So you likely have to set another threshold besides the 3,500,
Well, it'd be
which
more.
could be the 5, or it could be a different one.
I don't see any more questions up here,
Okay.
Tony. So if
Okay,
you
I'm sorry.
wanna-
I'll keep going. Item number 2 is exceptions and exemptions to the core requirements. What is currently allowed? We require all our core requirements in critical drainage areas without any exemptions unless approved by Mr. Director. And it also includes formal flow control and water quality facilities in these areas. So what does this mean for small developments? So additions, ADUs, garages, and single-family residential building permits within critical drainage areas must meet these core requirements. It does pose an unreasonable hardship for some of the standalone projects, which I'll discuss. You have this attachment A in your exhibit 1, and I know it's so hard to read on the screen here, but hopefully you've taken a closer look at it within your packet. I just wanted to show it here in order to illustrate the number of core requirements that are needed in drainage review for a project. And under existing code, all of these have to be met in critical drainage areas if you're proposing 1 square feet of development. Yeah, it's quite enormous amount of work to do for an applicant. And then there are some of the core requirements that I'll discuss where staff is proposing to allow some of the exemptions that are allowed in the King County Stormwater Design Manual.
Tony, can I ask a question here?
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between core requirement 3 and core requirement 9? So 2 and 9, you cannot get an exemption there, but flow control is core requirement 3, and flow control BMPs is core requirement 9. Can you kind of walk me through?
Well, quickly, the flow control number 3, core requirement number 3, is a vault, is a pond, is a large pipe tank.
Okay.
So that's a formal facility for flow control.
Gotcha.
And then under number 9, it's LID,
Yep.
infiltration, dispersion, pervious pavements, others.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So what about the authority of the director to grant exceptions? So governing by exception is not really a preferred method of permitting. It's going to lead to inconsistent decisions and perceptions of unfairness. And the staff preference is to try to implement some clearly written code that's both transparent and that can be reasonably implemented. The staff recommends that we do allow some exemptions as approved by the Department of Ecology in critical drainage areas, and they are clearly documented in our Stormwater Design Manual. They're regionally applied as well. We would ask that no exemptions be allowed for core requirement number 2 and number 9. This would significantly reduce the number of requests. Pretty much all of these projects have requested director-approved exemptions and exceptions to this point. And those exempted projects would have to meet some of the strict criteria already in the Surface Water Design Manual that are transparent to everybody who is looking at the project.
Would you bifurcate the critical, can you go back there real quick?
Yep.
Would you bifurcate the critical drainage areas there for the landslide hazard drainage areas too? Potentially? Think about it.
Think about it. Off the top of my head, I would say no. But I'll go more into the low impact development standard. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, yep.
So how can we require LID with no exemptions? You might ask, and actually you have asked. So Appendix C of our Stormwater Design Manual actually lists where infiltration and dispersion are infeasible. So it lists on and near landslide hazard areas and where there are downstream flooding and erosion impacts, you can't disperse, you cannot infiltrate. However, there are other LID BMPs that can be used, and they are a reduced impervious footprint. Just make your development smaller. You can identify a native growth retention area. You could use Hollywood driveway wheel strips to gain a credit.
What is that?
And I like this one.
Explain that Hollywood to me.
It's just a wheel strip driveway. Instead of paving 10 feet wide for a driveway, you pave 2.5 feet strips on each side for your wheels.
Okay.
So it reduces the impervious footprint.
Okay.
But what I really like is this requirement, if you can't infiltrate or disperse, is providing some minimal disturbance foundations. So there's piles. So you have native growth underneath a proposed development, the impervious footprint that you're proposing. And then the last is open deck open grid decking over a pervious surface, so your decks can go down into native soils or compost amended soils. So you can do LID in landslide hazard drainage areas, but you're going to be restricted to the types of LID that you would use. What is the staff rationale for allowing some of these exemptions that we've proposed? The largest one is that they're really difficult to site on single-family lots, especially if you have an existing structure. Detention and water quality facilities are run off of gravity, so if you have an area that drains one way and you're proposing to put your development maybe on the downslope end, your only choice for the location is in that downslope end. So sometimes it's very difficult to site. The next one is the excavation itself might create some unintended consequences. And you've mentioned that retained trees under our tree retention requirements could be affected by the siting of these large facilities. And they are large. For a single-family residential area, there was a public testimony earlier about the size of them. They can take up a quarter of a lot or more for sizing it the way that the stormwater design manual requires you to size it. Another point is that property owners may not properly maintain these new facilities. They do need to have annual maintenance. And then there will be some additional city resources in order to inspect these new stormwater facilities. The City Council has some alternatives.
Tony, sorry, I've got a question up here. Councilmember Moran?
I had a question written down, actually more of a, well, I guess more of a question. So if we don't have the facilities for the water, my question to you is, and it's kind of give me some ideas of, what do you do to control the water flow and then the quality of the water?
LID. Especially in flat areas around Pine and Beaver Lake. You use low-impact development techniques.
And how do you secure them to be there forever?
That's item number 2.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Well, I mean, okay.
There are definitely noticing requirements on title for those as well. They are a little simpler to understand to the lay property owner than a large detention facility or media filtration facility. They look more natural. They're part of the landscape in most cases. So what are some of the alternatives? We don't adopt these code changes, and we keep the no exemptions requirements for small projects for all the core requirements unless approved by the director. This is a managing by exception concept, and it does run the risk of inconsistencies and perceptions of unfairness. What staff will do to try to mitigate that will develop a list of administrative conditions in which the director would consider approving an exemption. I'm going to move on to Tightline.
I've got another question. Hold on. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, so when we're talking about like the flow control for, again, if we're in some sort of a landslide hazard area, steep slope kind of condition, it's my understanding that the real solution would be for us to put in a tight line that people can tap into, and that would help to alleviate a lot of these challenges, wouldn't it?
It would definitely help, yes.
As a sidebar to that, I think I'd asked about that for a trunk line, potentially.
Because we don't want individual homeowners to do these, because one, they're going to be too expensive, and again, they're going to have the unintended consequences, right? They're going to be more disruptive to the environment than what they'll save. So the real answer is that we need to do something that's more holistic.
I agree. I'm going to move on to Tightline. Since, sorry, good segue.
You're a good straight person.
We didn't even practice.
We're going forward on
So,
our slide deck.
So what is a stormwater tightline? You can see in the photo. It's a stormwater pipe that's anchored at grade on typically steep slope areas. Clearing grading is minimized, so you reduce the amount of disturbance to the slope. It's designed to convey stormwater to an acceptable discharge location downstream of landslide hazard areas. However, often you will need to provide a easement, private easement through adjacent properties in order to construct this tightline. When are they required in the existing code? In the Inglewood plat, the threshold is at 500 square feet of new plus replaced impervious. In critical drainage areas, there are no exemptions, so you must provide the tightline. Obviously, there is the disconnect there because Inglewood areas are also critical drainage areas. So what do we recommend? We do recommend that there be allowed an exemption to a tightline requirement. And the thresholds that we've set or recommend are 1,000 square feet of new plus existing impervious surface added since January 8th, 2001. So that is your new, you count however much new impervious you have, and then you have to count all of your existing impervious that has been added since 2001. And if that threshold is less than 1,000, then you get to propose an alternate system to Public Works.
Tony, I have a question. I've got a couple questions up here. Deputy Mayor Hornish.
So I want to understand that a little bit better. In the agenda bill, you said proposes less than 1,000 square feet of new plus existing. And then you say the existing, or the impervious includes improvements that were approved without a tightline since January 8th. So if it was existing prior to January 8th, 2001, it's not existing now? I mean,
It wouldn't be counted.
it wouldn't be
toward that
included.
threshold.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to understand.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the question that I have on that is related to, how do you know? I mean, there could be unpermitted impervious surface added prior to January 8th, 2001. I think we've seen Mary Wichter put a slide up of a particular home that I ended up running by yesterday just to kind of check out. And it's got a ton, I mean, almost the entire lot is impervious surface.
Yeah.
How do we know if that was even permitted?
And I'll skip ahead here. I'll come back to
there you go.
the other
Okay.
one. So where does that date come from? It's when the Endangered Species Act a ruling was made, and it was added I think in December when we talked about trying to account for those projects that might year after year come in under that 1,000 square foot threshold. It wasn't added as the intention to make property owners account for past development impacts. So if a property owner had a house unpermitted in 2000, that additional existing impervious surface built after 2001 wasn't meant to capture that. If the city council desired that, then we would just take that away and say, and all existing impervious surface that didn't have a tightline. But what this does allow is older homes can remodel under this exemption. Before 2001, it's considered an older home, and it would allow people who wanted to add an addition over their driveway, maybe over an existing impervious surface. It will allow them to just create some changes because these are older homes. So if you recognize that if you do want to go with the threshold to include all existing impervious surfaces, it would not allow for these remodels, and they would have to tightline their projects. And then the last bullet point is that this date is consistent with other dates. It's consistent with the dates that the Stormwater Design Manual has for requirements under flow control and water quality mitigation. So if you reach the threshold for requiring water quality mitigation, you have to retroactively provide water quality treatment for all of the impervious surfaces created after 2001.
Okay, we've got a couple questions up here. Councilmember
go back to
Valderrama.
this.
Yeah, you go back to that slide you were just talking about, consistent with the dates. Is this also consistent with what's done by our peer cities as to taking this date and the Species Act as their basis for also in Redmond?
For flow control and water quality, for those jurisdictions who have adopted the King County Manual, yes.
Okay, thank you.
They don't have a tightline requirement.
They do for
Sorry.
areas that they've designated as landslide hazard drainage areas. That is in the stormwater manual.
Councilmember Stewart.
So just so I understand your example with the date, so because it says less than 1,000 square feet of new plus existing. So your example was, I want to add something onto an already existing impervious surface. If we don't have that date there, it means that that would still be counted. And so if my footprint of my home was more than 1,000 square feet, then anything I wanted to do would be subject to this. And so
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand that. Thank you.
I just want to go really quickly back to the 1,000 square foot threshold is not the only condition that needs to be met in order to exclude you from a tight line requirement. You've got to propose this alternate system. Where's the water going to go? Or we're not going to allow it to just directly discharge onto somebody else's home and create flooding problems from them. We're going to have a geotech engineer recommend an alternate system, and it's going to be based both on a quantitative and qualitative analysis, and it must consider cumulative impacts. So all of the discharges that could go to that point where they're proposing their alternate discharge location, they've got to assess that to see if it's got capacity, to see if there's going to be any downstream impacts of erosion or landslides or flooding. So I just want to make clear that it's not just 1,000 square foot threshold that we're recommending for the specific condition for exemption. I'll move on to your alternatives for the council to consider is to not adopt the code changes and maintain the current regulations for tight lines with no exemptions. You could consider an alternative to 1,000 square foot threshold. Some have been suggested by the public. And we do want to caution that any of these alternatives that are less than that 1,000 square foot threshold, we do request that we have an opportunity to review it with legal counsel.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
In that regard, we heard earlier, I think in public comment, that Mercer Island's been 500 for 20 years. Is that, you agree with that?
No. I had the chance to talk to the city engineer there. And what they have is there's a requirement for low impact development when you are proposing something that it reaches a 500 square foot net difference in impervious surface. So it's not flow control, it's low impact development. However, if you go through the infeasibility criteria that is listed in the stormwater manual there, and they use the ecology manual and not the King County manual, but if you can show that you can't do low impact development, then they do require you to provide a flow control facility like a stormwater tank. And what they have there is they've got a table that they've prepared to pretty easily tell you this is the length, this is the depth of your facility that you have to provide flow control for. So it makes the engineering and the applicant have a little bit more ease in submitting what they need to submit, but it doesn't make the requirements any less stringent. And as I understand it now, even more, the requirement for detention is based on an old modeling standard from 30 years ago. It's an event-based period where it just considers one rainfall event. It fills up the tank and then it discharges. The model that we use now, region-wide, that is required by ecology is a continuous simulation model. And you have to, and what it does is it has decades worth of rainfall data, and it accounts for storm after storm after storm after storm that is going into this detention facility. So the table that Mercer Island produced is not meeting the current regulations or standards
The
for
NPDES, yeah,
detention. When it kips up to that 5,000 square foot, then it does. So they've got this table set up for.
But my question is more about the threshold. They have a 500 square foot threshold, and you're recommending 1,000.
So they have it for flow control and LID, and we are recommending 500 for drainage review, which would trigger LID at any threshold. So actually, our standard is even lower than theirs for LID in critical drainage areas.
So go back, if you could, to that prior slide. So I want to make sure I have in my head, the 1,000 that you're proposing is for the tight line. They don't have a tight line type of exemption or requirement?
No, it's on flow control.
And it's 500. Okay, that's what I needed to understand. Okay, thank you.
So theirs would be the same as our 500 then.
Councilmember Stewart.
Would it make sense here to also have the or and a % of coverage for new and existing impervious surface as well? For consistency's sake.
Yeah. I think that should be considered, yeah.
I think you've got several nodding heads up here.
Just a quick comment on the percent area. So the development regulations already require on new subdivisions, right? I know we're talking kind of new and existing. New subdivisions are for a minimum 45% of the property must be landscaped. So just for comparative notes, we would not want to make sure we're creating inconsistencies in developability between the different codes. But again, it can be ferreted out a little bit, but we do have code provisions already, and it is graduated based on zoning type in our city code today under 21A.
I believe we had quite a discussion related to landscape, and so we equated landscape with pervious surface.
Yeah.
Okay, last item. Repeal of the Inglewood ordinance. We do recommend that we repeal it in order to gain consistencies. And what are your alternatives? Don't adopt the code changes. That would repeal it and maintain existing conflicts. But if you do that, please consider some language in the code that will allow us to indicate that the Inglewood Historic Plat ordinance is subordinate to the more restrictive codes. So I'll conclude with our recommendations for the City Council this evening, and then take any remaining questions that you might have.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
So I don't have any questions, but just helpful guidance, I hope. I'm okay with repealing the ordinance if we get everything at those first 3 steps. But I think there's some more work to be done, so I don't think we're in any position to adopt anything tonight, is just my take. So. And hopefully you have clear guidance as to what you think we're looking for you to go back and work on.
Yeah, I think we have some guidance. We're going to come back to you with some additional information on after we've taken a look at it some more, just to really compare what it looks like with different areas, different lot coverages, lot areas in the city.
Well, if you do the percentages like Steve was talking, I mean, you've got to figure out for different zoning, you have a different percentage. I mean, it's a lot of drafting work.
It gets quite complicated in a code that we're trying to simplify because it is so complicated.
Understood.
But yeah, recognize that it will take some effort to do.
I think we've gotten some good direction from council, and we'll have to look at actual code language to try to take your ideas and codify that. But we've had good input from you tonight, so thank you.
I just wanted to ask one question. We've been kind of running around the room making sure we're clear. We heard the word bifurcate. Land landslide hazard drainage areas and critical drainage areas. There was a decision made in a previous code amendment that tied those two together, and I guess I want to get clarification. Do you want to regulate them separately? Because one of the first things we can do is undo that definition that put them together, and they could be dealt with on separate paths, because part of the problem that we're having is
They're stuck
the
together.
definition made them one and the same. So is that what we heard correctly, is they should be legislated separately?
I think so, since I put it forward.
Okay.
And if you want to do it by unbundling them, that might be the easiest solution, but I was going to leave that solution to staff as
Okay.
to hearing what we wanted to do.
That was the running around, was thinking that might be one easy step, because then we can deal with landslide hazard drainage areas separately. I think what's confused it is the definitions created a code conflict.
Yeah, and I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, the idea of doing that was so that the city had the same code for everything, critical drainage area, but yet I think you're hearing from us that we think they are different.
Exactly. That's why I just came up to make sure we had that understanding. Okay, thank you.
The core requirements, is there any direction on which core requirements may or may not be exempted from either landslide hazard drainage area or areas that drain to Pine or Beaver Lake?
I gotta look at this.
I would look to you. I mean,
Okay.
come back with a recommendation, I guess, is what I'm thinking, and we can go through that more. I love the chart, the flow chart, and we can look
Yes,
at
that
those
was
core
helpful.
requirements. But if you can kind of think that through, but I think it's a different analysis for those two areas.
Yeah, there may be some different thresholds that we can propose to the council.
Hold on, I've got buttons here. So, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that will be helpful by splitting it apart, we spent a lot of time discussing tight lines. If it's not a landslide hazard area or not a steep slope, then tight line is off the table, right? So if we can somehow draw that distinction so that folks who are just trying to develop near a Pine Lake or Beaver Lake don't get caught up in while we're figuring out how to deal with our tight line issues.
Yeah, and actually the code has that ability already, because, as you say, Beaver Lake and Pine Lake do not have landslide hazard drainage areas. So by code right now, even the way it's adopted right now, you don't have to meet any of the tight line requirements in Pine Beaver Lake drainage areas for tight line. But I think that I'm hearing that there may be some different thresholds that we need to consider for the core requirements and perhaps for the drainage review for both landslide hazard areas and then areas that drain to Pine and Beaver Lake.
And it sounds like the landslide hazard areas, you want a lower threshold. So we'll look at that and make a recommendation to council.
Councilmember Moran.
And also into the critical areas, if you could look.
Yes, the difference
Looking into the
between
critical areas.
ecology and Department of Commerce.
Yeah, only just because, I mean, looking at the PFAS stuff, I can't just rely on ecology.
Yeah, so we have the RCW definition of critical areas. I'll read it to you, but we can also send it via email to you. Critical areas include the following areas and ecosystems: wetlands, areas with a critical recharge effect on aquifers used for potable water, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, frequently flooded areas, geographically hazardous areas. Geologically hazardous areas, and fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas does not include such artificial features or constructs as irrigation delivery systems, irrigation infrastructure, irrigation canals, or drainage ditches that lie within the boundaries of and are maintained by a port district or an irrigation district or company. No wonder we don't use this RCW definition.
Where was that from?
Thanks, Steve, for finding it.
Where is that from?
Councilmember Moran,
RCW
that is the Growth Management Act definition of critical area.
Okay.
Those 5 categories, and your code is designed to mimic those 5 categories. So they're aligned that way.
But yeah, just to be clear, critical drainage areas are not listed in that list of critical areas.
Okay. Any more questions?
Oh,
Or do you guys need clarification from us?
I think we've got enough information to start out with. It's going to take a little bit of time and effort in order to develop some of this, and we may need another open house or kind of a public process to get some additional feedback from the public on using the percentages, especially. So it may take a while. What I propose is that in the meantime, per the existing code, the director is allowed to make exemptions and exceptions to the core requirements. And I just want to be clear that the city council is acceptable to that. So we've got 10 building permits that we're trying to review now, and one that's less than 500 square feet proposed. That is in accordance to the existing code now.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say
Hold
no.
on.
I'm sorry. I'm not first, yeah.
Oh, I'm busting my.
Okay. Councilmember Stewart.
So I'm guessing, and this is just a guess here, but I'm guessing because when I look at some of the changes, because right now there's no exemptions allowed, so we heard tonight one where because there are no exemptions allowed, someone may be required to do something really horrible, like dig up the better part of their lot next to Beaver Lake, when in fact that's not really what we want, and that's not really the best way to manage the stormwater. So is that why you're asking, because there are situations like that? And,
Yes,
and I'm not trying to legislate a specific case here, but I'm trying to understand the request.
That is what the request is based on. There are a number of pending building permits that we need to either say you need to meet these core requirements, or we need to allow some exemptions based on our professional judgment. And we have some inclination to, if tree retention is the problem, where they cannot get storm facility detention in place, we have some inclination to take that as reasonable.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
I'm going to take a firmer position and say no, because I don't think you have clear policy guidance from us yet. It's still fluid, and I know it's frustrating for people that want to move forward, but until, and then if we allow the director to do that now, you're back to
By exemption.
by exemption. Yep, you're doing everything by exemption, and I just don't like that. So I would say no.
I have a question, and you may have defined this earlier. How many are in that landslide hazard drainage area versus being in the Beaver Lake, Pine Lake area?
Maybe half.
Half and half.
Yeah.
So far.
Councilmember Valderrama.
But I'm just wondering, if we say no, what's the alternative? I mean, or is it?
Well, the alternative is that people would not be able to move forward with their project until such time that we get more direction from council and have the codification for going forward.
Well, would we have to take a resolution to do that, or is?
Right now, staff has or director has some discretion. We've not exercised that because council has been in deliberation. And as Councilmember Hornish has said, it's a fluid situation. And so we are trying to determine what the parameters of those exemptions might be. So but right now, technically, staff does have the authority to do that. However, they've not done it because of the deliberations that council has, because we've not been able to determine council intent. And typically exemptions are used to validate council intent but there may be a technical reason that something is a little bit funny. But again, staff is trying to exercise or to assist council in that, making the intent clear.
Implementing our intent.
Implementing your intention.
I do have a question, though, just for clarification purposes. Of these 10 permits, there is the means to move forward. It just may be cost prohibitive to move forward. Is that a fair assumption, or not in every case?
Not in every case.
Okay. There are some that are
Gravity
caught.
systems.
Okay.
And some significant environmental detriment, in our opinion. So
Okay.
there are reasonable solutions that can be had through normal practices. Again, the manual is built for larger developments. They don't fit,
One-offs.
not everything fits in the shoebox. So again, there are reasonable alternatives. Even better yet than some of these vaults are people are proposing to get off their septic systems. Like adjacent to the lake, there's not a better
Right. You want them to
solution
get
for
off.
water quality.
Right.
Right? So we have that, but we're kind of stuck. So
Councilmember Stewart?
You had mentioned in the beginning that we might be able to take some of these changes individually. Are there any of the proposed edits that we could take individually and not as the rest of the group that would work, or do they really all have to come together?
Well, the proposed changes that you've discussed with the percentages are not something that we could approve this evening because we need some time to take a look at those. So there are, aside from the last item, repeal the Inglewood ordinance, the other changes that you would like to the code will require some effort to bring back to you.
Okay.
And as the department director, I'm not sure the exact timeline, right? You have Tawny and one engineer doing storm work, and right now we have Zacus, which is a critical timeline. We have, basin plannings that are, out there. We can't do it all at once. Again, Department of Two to manage the city's 35 square miles of storm drain. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of what comes when and that resource that we have very little of, so.
Councilmember Stewart, did you have another question?
Yeah, I would actually say that based on this discussion, I feel like we've given staff a pretty good idea of our intent. And so I would be comfortable with allowing them to make educated, professional decisions so that people can move forward in a reasonable way and not impose a requirement that's actually more environmentally detrimental than a reasonable alternative. So I think we've given them a pretty good idea of our intent.
Mayor, may I make one suggestion, or at least something for the council to think about? This isn't a recommendation, it's just a suggestion. You might consider allowing the director to make those kinds of good faith, reasonable judgment interpretations for a sunsetted period until you come back with clearer guidance. Maybe it has a hard deadline, maybe it has a something like that, so that it's not going to just continue to be governing by exception. It has it allows them to process the things they know they already have on their plate.
I have a question. Over what period of time have you incorporated those 10? Have those 10 come about in the last, how long?
Just starting in 2017 when the code amendments took place.
So we took in applications and nobody really vetted out what all these code changes would do to applications, especially on small single-family residential remodels or additions or new construction on lots of their existing record. So we have had people who have been in accepted status since April of 17.
Okay.
And they're stuck with us, right? The building permit codes, those are IBC. Everything is fairly simple to manage, but yet when you get into the development part of the site and the physical constraints, that then drainage review kicks in. So some of these folks have been churning for quite a while. And that's a byproduct of new code and learning as we go. So I would say we can certainly move forward tomorrow with anybody coming in. It's a no because while we wait on deliberating and changing codes, but our esteemed attorney's opportunity for allowances there was a pretty good suggestion, in my opinion.
I'm inclined to allow the director to exercise some discretion with these because I think it's an unreasonable amount of time that some of these folks have been waiting. But I do want to draw a hard line in the sand. I don't want a whole bunch of new applications that are going to also get that, director discretion as well. So similar to what your suggestion was. But I want to be sure that staff understands then council's intent.
Right.
Truly, I mean, I think for, personally in the landslide hazard area, I'm really concerned with dumping water down a hill and what happens there. And then tree retention, certainly. And in the landslide hazard area, it's really important to have those trees standing. So as long as staff is hearing council, then I think it's okay to exercise discretion to move those through.
Yeah, I'm sure the folks in the audience who have been working with staff, who have been trying their best, would nod their heads along. Like, they're not just coming and asking for the exception because that's just easy, right? They know the rules and they're trying to mimic to the best of their abilities. And we are pushing, staff is pushing, Danica out of Storm and Stephanie out of Development Review are going toe-to-toe on a lot of these sites for a lot of time to try to help. But we are stuck by rules that don't fit. You can't put a size 10 foot in a size 8 shoe. It just doesn't work. So.
I've got a few more comments up here too, but
Okay,
Mr. City Manager?
I was going to suggest that council basically give this authority or their intention by motion and allow the council or allow the director to make those determinations. I would say to the end of June, let's say, with no new applications until such time that council sets the new rules.
I've got a few more comments up here. Councilmember Moran?
How many of those applications are asking for exemptions in the critical landslide areas?
The landslide hazard drainage areas, I don't know the exact number, but I think about half, like 5.
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
Yeah, I want to kind of piggyback to what was kind of suggested. I'm trying to think if June's, I'm okay with some discretion for some period. With a sunset, I think that's a great idea. June, I could probably get comfortable with that, I guess is where I'm going. How long do you think it'll be to come, you come back with this? I'm not sure we're going to have a meeting of the minds even when you come back is my concern. But how long do you think before you even come back? June?
Likely not.
Not by June?
No.
Because you're busy doing Zaccoos and everything else. Yeah. But no new applications? At least that would allow you to process these 10 that have been waiting an enormous amount of time. I'm okay with that through June.
And just to clarify, the city couldn't say we won't take a new application, but it could say that the application won't be eligible for any director's discretionary exemption.
Until council adopts, and everybody would know that coming in. Versus the people who filed a year ago or applied a year ago had no idea, and it's not fair. Okay, I got you. I'm okay with that.
You want to make the motion?
So I would, so let's see if I can do this. Ready? I move that we pass a resolution that allows director discretion for the stormwater code for the existing applications, or the applications in the pipeline.
I'll second that.
Until
At the end of June.
Until June 30, 2018. Sorry, I move that we do that.
Okay.
I'll second.
So we've got a motion and it's been seconded. Is there any discussion? We've had plenty of that. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the motion passes.
And I'll say one thing, that we can't then second guess you either, so that's on us, because we're giving you that discretion. But do the best you can.
Steve will be very responsible. Okay, so are we on to item number 2?
We are.
Okay, item number 2 of the consent bill. There were some questions regarding our recommendations for the outreach and future homeowner noticing of low-impact development best management practices. So to clarify the new regulations that we're proposing requires new subdivisions and short plats to provide outreach and education materials for low-impact development. It allows us to support continued maintenance and operation of these LID BMPs, and it includes materials like an educational kiosk in a subdivision where there's a high foot traffic area. It includes having developers provide educational brochures and handouts to the people that they sell their homes to. It requires noticing on the final plat of maintenance responsibilities of these homeowners. It also requires noticing on the homeowner's CC&Rs. The last one in red is a noticing on title, and it's actually required of not only short plats and subdivisions, but any permit, standalone, single-family residential, under core requirement number 9 to put a notice on title of these LID requirements, that they're required to maintain them. The city has, and I'll switch over real quick to a brochure that we've developed that these property owners can review. And this is on the city's website, but it allows them to see what are the different types of LID BMPs might be on their property. And we actually do have a little map that is required to be notice on title that shows where their specific LID facility is on their specific property. So we couldn't require all the things that I had shown before in the slide of single-family residential that are not associated with a subdivision or short plat. But we do have these brochures that we can provide to them if they have questions about their maintenance requirements.
So I think the question surrounding the noticing on title and it being limited to short plats and proposed subdivisions is that in areas like Tamarack or Inglewood, or frankly anywhere where you have a single family, a lot, and someone develops it and puts in a LID, that then it can be ripped out. Mm-hmm. And it has been ripped out in Tamarack. I've run by that house a million times. They had a pervious surface driveway and they put gravel in instead. And so how, there's obviously a mechanism for us to require it on title. The question is, what does that burden look like on staff in order to require that to be on title for single family homes that are not in a short plat or subdivision?
So we have not investigated, if you're looking for how many FTEs, we've not investigated that. We know that it will be increased workload for staff. We know that there are 10 a year, maybe, that have been coming through right now in these critical drainage areas. So if you can extrapolate that to 10 years' time, 100 or so LIDs inspections that would be required. And for us to work with these property owners as well, if they do pave them over, is there an alternative that they can use? We try to have kind of progressive enforcement, so it's not, hey, you broke the law, you put back your bioretention system. But we try to give them some alternatives. Hey, maybe you can change your driveway into a Hollywood driveway. But it is working back and forth with these property owners who may just not know. They didn't read their title, that they have these LID facilities on their property. And I will say that it's a regional learning curve. Mm-hmm. In 2016, 17, the region had to incorporate LID into all of their stormwater codes. So we're all kind of just learning on how to ensure that these things are for the long haul. Yeah.
Well, so I think my concern, though, is that if by code we're requiring LID, but then it's not on title, and that person either doesn't read their title or sells their property to someone and they rip it out, then the requirement to have it is gone. And especially in like the landslide hazard area or landslide hazard drainage area, the cumulative impact of that could be significant. So I think that was just my concern. And
So we do require them to put it on title, and just throughout the city, there are code enforcement that we just have to continue to do. Code enforcement, not an easy job.
Yeah, and I don't expect code enforcement to be out driving looking for people that have ripped out their LID, right? I mean, it's more likely than not, it's their neighbor, right? I mean, if we get a complaint about a tree, it's usually the neighbor.
Right.
So, I realize the enforcement of this is problematic potentially, but I think, I at least wanted to highlight the issue. And I think I wasn't the only council member that highlighted the concern, so. Deputy Mayor Hornish.
I got two questions. In the agenda bill on Title 21A, critical drainage area, it includes a landslide hazard drainage area already in our code. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, I'm looking at Exhibit 1, Attachment B, Title 21A Development Code. The last sentence there says critical drainage areas include areas that drain the Pine Lake, Beaver Lake, and all landslide hazard drainage areas. I didn't know. We've already got code that says critical drainage areas include the landslide hazard drainage areas?
Let's change that.
Yes. And we've received direction that we need to bifurcate that.
Now, okay, but I thought that was something that was being proposed, but that's in the amendments that we adopted in November.
2016, yes.
Okay, so that's just okay. But what's being proposed is it only what's in red there on the page right above that? Noticing on title, noticing on the final plat, and on the CC&Rs for proposed subdivision and short plats. I think we definitely want that, so we could just adopt this as is, but what we want is to go one step further on the single-family residence that's not part of a short plat or subdivision. And we can deal with that later is where I'm going.
Yeah.
So we could adopt this as is, and you can come back, when you come back with your next things, with trying to address putting it on title for those single-family residences as well, correct?
So they are already required to put it on title per core requirement number 9. So I'm not quite sure what.
Get an exemption there. Okay.
For SFRs,
Okay.
they are already
Okay, so we're good.
required. So I'm not quite sure how to change this proposed code amendment. I know that there are issues with enforcement, but I don't think that they apply in this code amendment. That we have to deal with them on an outreach basis.
Okay, but what I don't understand is why do we have to have it in here then for the proposed subdivision and short plats if they're required to have core
We
requirement
don't.
9?
We could take that out.
It's
It's
the
redundant.
education
Okay.
materials,
Yeah.
the rest
Oh, it's
of
the
it.
education. I can understand that.
Yes.
Okay.
This is just about education. And the question, I actually raised the question that said, can we do more than just required on a title for single-family homes? Because I'll admit, I don't read my title.
Nobody does. Sorry.
But that was the discussion we had, and that's a little more challenging. And so I think that's where we can take this as is. It's a step in the right direction. And if we, as a region, figure out more things, we can, we reserve the right to be smarter later, right?
Well, I'll leave can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
I would move that we approve this ordinance amending Chapter 1310, 1320.030 concerning surface water management and amending the code 21A 15.255 relating to critical drainage areas and providing for severability and establishing an effective date.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? By a vote of 7-0, that is passed.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, council.
So now we have item 5. And I think I was the one who had pulled this, and I need to pull it up on my thing here. I think Steve said the updated version, and there's so many updated versions at this point. I don't even have what that is, but the reason I had pulled it originally was for prioritization of those projects for the flashing yellow that would match up with concurrency. Identified intersections that were failing. I wanted those to move to the top for flashing yellows. And the other one, the last one on the list, I think Steve said it's since been removed, but there was one for a flashing yellow that's slated to be a roundabout on Issaquah Falls City Road, and that didn't make any sense to me. So, but I think Steve said those been removed, so we're good.
So I think with iCompass, if you reload it, you lose your notes. Is that?
I can't.
Yes.
Yes.
We have a new version that has been uploaded that is contract, it's revised. So second page, third paragraph, halfway through that paragraph, installing a flashing yellow at those intersections that are projected to fail under the concurrency approach approved by council on March 6, 2018 will be given a high priority. So we added the priority for flashing yellows. And then in the description of work on Exhibit A, page 2, which is task 1.0. And at the bottom, we list all of them. We left it in there, but we put in strike and delete format, Southeast Issaquah Falls City Road in 247th place. Because if we move the project forward on Issaquah Falls City Road, that becomes a roundabout. That failure becomes non-failure anymore. So,
Deputy Mayor Hornish.
You just referenced March 6th, right? And I can't find it where it was, but you said as the concurrency that we adopted on March 6th.
Oh, yeah.
Can we change that as of tonight, since we went back from a D to a C for the minor arterials?
I would say, sure, it's probably moot.
It probably is.
So you would have to recommend a motion to change.
Yeah, but that one intersection that we're talking about is probably not even on
It's
here.
not on
I
this
haven't
list.
looked
Not on
at
this
it.
list.
No, actually, it is on this
Oh, it
list.
Is it?
It is Northeast 8th Street and 242nd Avenue. It is on this list.
Okay. So I would move we authorize.
It needs to be changed.
Well, that's why
Yeah.
I would move to authorize this, to execute it with that amendment, to make it that it's the concurrency as approved tonight in the body of it for the flashing yellow signals and intersection improvements for $114,766. Reserve of $12,000, not to exceed $126,766, but as amended.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Nope, seeing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By a vote of 7-0, it passes. Okay, and then finally, we have agenda item 7, which was the Transportation Master Plan Contract Amendment with Farron Pierce.
And that was
Mayor.
me.
Yep.
Similarly, in the agenda bill, and I haven't focused on the actual contract itself, but I just want to clarify and make sure that on the second page of the agenda bill, it references that R 2018-782 in the middle, that we revise that as well to refer to tonight for the concurrency that they're going to be working under.
So I did just confirm with Farron Piers prior to Kendra leaving that there wasn't any fee change or any other work change. So if you wanted to just make that formal motion and just codify that or adopt it through this item change, it's totally fine. But
So I'll go ahead and move then to approve Farron Pierce contract amendment as amended. Actually, I'll have to stop a second. Is it even in the contract that it references what concurrency they're going to use? It's in the agenda bill, but I don't know.
I don't believe so. I
Okay.
think it just references the work.
Just the work. So, but to clarify it, just to make sure we're on the same page, but the contract amended with the clarification for the Transportation Master Plan project.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? By a vote of 7-0, it passes. Okay, now we're going to move to council reports and council committee reports. I'm not going to read my report. It's there. Jason has a report there as well. Does anyone else have a report? Nope. Okay. City manager.
I think,
Oh.
actually, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to mention that at the National League of Cities, I'm going to have the material scanned to be handed out to everybody. But the three big issues were, no surprise, the transportation. And there was a lot of angst from all the cities across the country that the current policy of this administration is you have to have matching funds. And the cities that most need it are the ones that don't have the matching funds to begin with, and the others are looking. So that was a contentious issue. I have to say that the administrative provided 3 or 4 secretaries of the cabinet came over to talk to the city. So they gave a lot of access to pick up the needs. Opioids was a huge issue, again, continues to grow across all our cities. And then there was special breakout sessions on the issues of Parkland, Florida, and how we deal with it. Ironically, as they talked to the states and the cities, first of all, the cities all recognize by and large, that they don't have any ability to regulate this, regardless of where you are in the country. Second, they recognize that the state of Washington was far ahead of everybody else as we started to present into what we have as far as laws, confiscation units, the school resource officers, and then one state did, or a couple states did have Bearcats, which are basically army vehicles that go through the walls. But I think we can use our backhoe from the water district and do that. So that's pretty much my report. The material will be following.
Mr. City Manager, did you have a report? There's no report. We do have an executive session tonight. Yep, sorry. Personnel pursuant to 42.30.110(1)G, and we estimate it to be about an hour.
I would move we extend the meeting till 11 o'clock.
Will there be action?
I need a second on that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of moving the meeting to, or concluding at 11, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?